Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you to Alex. She's back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense on the Afternoon Empire. So much to get through here. Kemi Badenoch suggesting Keir Starmer is courting Muslim voters amid that row over large public praying. This follows the Prime Minister's Wednesday demand that the Tory leader fire Tory official Nick Timothy, who called the Trafalgar Square mass Muslim prayer event an act of domination and division. Woo! He said that he should lose his job for that. This is the world we live in, kids. We'll have more on that story in a couple of moments. Should we ban all public prayer? Is that the answer? Also this afternoon, Keir Starmer faces internal Labour divisions over his migration policy, with some members urging a stringent approach and others advocating a significant softening, potentially moving closer to the EU stance. We know where this story is meant to go, don't we? We'll look at that too. And a surge in inflation and multiple interest rate hikes are expected this year for British households. This is a direct consequence of soaring oil and gas prices. These were triggered, of course, because of the war involving the United States, Iran and Israel. We'll have more on that story too. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. That is where you leave a voice note as well. You can message 87222. Do we just ban all public prayers? I was saying to Alex Phillips, we did touch on this a little bit yesterday and the day before. Something about this whole story has been rattling around in my head. Let's have a listen to the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage.
I've never seen Jewish services taking place in places of historic Christian worship or anywhere else. Look, we have to get this right. You know, we can't stop individuals praying. We wouldn't want to stop individuals praying. But mass prayer is banned. Mass Muslim prayer is banned in many Muslim countries in the Middle East itself. So, yes, we have to stop this kind of mass demonstration, provocative demonstration in historic British sites, because that's what it is.
Well, that's what he had to say in response to this. The mass Muslim prayer in Trafalgar Square, the open iftar, as it's called. This is an annual thing. It's been going for about 13 years. The event is theoretically open to all faiths and anyone who fancies showing up. But there is something about this that's causing concern, and the debate has widened since the Tory Shadow Justice Minister, Nick Timothy, referred to it as domination. That seems to be the thing where the Labour Party lost their minds over this. He should be fired for these guys. Really? Is that where we've arrived? You should be fired for having your view on what you believe on mass prayer. He has a defender, his own leader, Kemi Badenoch. Have a listen.
This debate, which Nick is having, is not about freedom of religion. It is about how religion is expressed in a shared public space and whether those expressions fit within the norms of British culture. And one of the things that I cannot believe is how Keir Starmer ordered his Labour MPs to pile on him. I will not take lectures from Keir Starmer or Labour on this, because in 2021, Keir Starmer pulled out of an event organised by this very same group, who are highly controversial, and he did so because he was sucking up to British Jews and the Board of Deputies to pretend that the Labour Party had changed. Now, in the wake of Gorton and Denton, he wants to suck up to a different community. This is the mother of all hypocrisy.
There it is. Well, it is the mother of all hypocrisy. I've thought long and hard about this prayer thing, and I think Nick Timothy is onto something. I can't quite put my finger on it. It's a bit like protests that annoy you, like Just Stop Oil, whereas a pro-British rally doesn't annoy you. It's all down, really, as to whether you agree with the protest or the event. Agree or disagree depends on where you sit on these things. So there's a bit of that going on here, though. For me, it's maybe something different. Trafalgar Square, think of what Trafalgar Square is, even if you're not from that neck of the woods, not from London. It belongs to everybody. That's precisely the point of Trafalgar Square. This is a magnificent civic arena. People gather there, some protest, some celebrate, mourn for generations. It derives its power from its neutrality. The moment we allow it to become a stage for religious performance, we kind of corrode something that is irreplaceable. And yet, year after year, mass Muslim prayers transform Nelson's column into the backdrop for worship. Why is this? London has over 400 mosques. 400 mosques. If any other faith, Christians, Jews, Hindus, regularly commandeered this shared ground for organised prayer, the outcry would be deafening. The selective silence here is kind of its own statement. This isn't about Islam, it's about principle. Public squares in secular democracies are not cathedrals. They're not temples. They exist precisely outside the domain of religion. When organised faith plants its flag in that place, it sends a territorial signal, however unintentional that might be. And remember, British secularism it's a hard-won and fragile situation. Trafalgar Square should inspire civic pride, not devotion to any god. Keep the prayers in the mosques, the churches or the synagogues, and keep our shared spaces genuinely shared. Now, Jewish News waded in on this, noting that Trafalgar Square hosts events for many religions, including their own annual Chanukah in the square. Now, that's a Jewish festival. I don't think it's quite a prayer thing, but it's a Jewish festival. It's been going for years. It's also attended by the mayor. The Jewish gathering attracts thousands. 19 years they've been doing this. So why is one different to the other in that sense? Is it because one is like a festival of lights and symbolism? One is an overt session of prayer. There is something more domineering about the prayer thing as distinct from just an event. Would that be, is that it? Is it as simple as that? Or do we just ban all public prayers? 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Oscar Redrop is back with us, former senior number 10 advisor. Afternoon to you, Oscar. I mean, let's get into this then. Kemi Badenoch accusing Keir Starmer of sucking up to Muslims to see off the threat from the Green Party. So it's got, you know, what started out as a bunch of people praying. I think that's what they were doing, either that or they were searching for the last morsel of Sadiq Khan's credibility. One of the two was going on. But there they were, thousands of them. Nick Timothy makes a comment. The world loses its mind. Keir Starmer wants the man fired. Kemi Badenoch steps in and defends him. Nigel Farage says something similar. Where are you at on this one?
On the politics of it, it is completely shameless thrashing around by Keir Starmer and deflection. To a degree, it's quite smart because it's worked. I mean, if you think about the context in which Keir Starmer instructed basically all his backbench MPs and himself to pile in on Nick Timothy on this issue, calling for him to be sacked, which is preposterous. It was due to Kemi really putting him under the screw on the Peter Mandelson scandal. And so in that sense, you know, it's quite clever what Keir Starmer's done, but it is utterly shameless. And it is utterly a reflection on him, this empty vessel now, with very little political capital, being completely driven by the left of his party. I don't think Keir Starmer would have touched something like this a year ago, but it's desperate times for a desperate prime minister. On the issue itself, I think it is quite complex. I personally feel uncomfortable about telling people who live in this country, you know, if they can pray or not. I think that gets on pretty shaky ground. But just widening it out slightly without avoiding the question. Yeah. So Trafalgar Square is very close to where I work. So I'm there every day, and it's not just the religious aspect. It's kind of a standards aspect. I was in Rome. God, I sound like some jet setter now, but I was in Rome not that long ago.
I thought you said this morning.
I'm just in Rome this morning, and I saw like the Colosseum and just generally like that kind of heritage sites within the city. the standards are way up here. You know, if you litter, it is €1,000 fines. There are people, you know, marching around, making sure it is respected and clean. And you just feel like this is a place that takes so much pride in its heritage and culture, and the standards are so high. Trafalgar Square, it's a mess. You know, there's protests every day, there's buskers, there's litter everywhere. And so I'm not avoiding, I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but it is kind of, it is all wrapped in the same thing.
Yeah.
It feels like as a country, we're soft. We just let any old thing just walk up and down our heritage sites. Yeah, you can do this there. Yeah, you do that there. And it's a standards thing. And when you go to other major European cities, I'm shocked by the difference.
Yeah. There is a difference. And I wonder with this particular, I mean, you know, Trafalgar Square is often used for, you know, the big Christmas tree goes up at Christmas. Kit, my little boy, went to one of the carol things there a couple of years back. You know, thousands of kids all singing Christmas carols, Salvation Army, giving it large in the corner. I mean, everything was fantastic. You know, that felt like that's what Trafalgar Square is, but I guess that could be argued to be a religious statement as well. If we banned all forms of religious expression, or is it just prayer? Because Nigel Farage, of course, condemned as well as Nick Timothy, because he suggested that the prayer thing should be banned. Is it the prayers? Is it a different religion? What is it? Because I can't quite put my finger on this.
I think so, right? And like, look, let's be really honest about it. And you know, and this shouldn't be particularly controversial, but ultimately, we are a Christian country, right?
Yeah.
So there is a difference between a Christmas tree and Christmas carols being sung in Trafalgar Square.
Agreed.
And mass prayer, you know, and you know, we are slightly, it's the only criticism I have actually of the debate as a whole, we're slightly playing, and it's, you know, fair play in a way, we're slightly playing to Keir Starmer's tune here. This is the argument that he and his backbench left-wing MPs want to be having right now, because it is completely distracting from, you know, the utter failures of this government. And look, do we want integration to this country? You know, I mean, I think we do, absolutely. And that's a really complex, delicate thing, right?
Correct.
But I do understand, you know, Nick Timothy was not an Islamophobic kind of statement or critique to make. I think it's fair enough in a place like Trafalgar Square, you know, mass formal prayer, you know, like, we probably should have a debate about that. It doesn't quite work. I don't think.
There is something about the prayer, and this really only kind of comes into the Islamic faith. I was on an aeroplane once, and there's a fella, you know, with his carpet, and he was kneeling down at the end of the aisle praying. Now, my problem there is, I don't want to see anybody on a plane praying, frankly. That's not a comfortable place to be. Forget religion. I just don't want to see somebody praying to God when I'm 33,000 feet in the air. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look, when it's like mass and it's public,
yeah,
you cut across a line now, I think, where like you just have to be respectful to others. You know, if we are a really tolerant and I say this with a pinch of salt, but you know, a tolerant and liberal democracy, then actually that kind of mass kind of, here it is, you can't get away from it, in one of the most kind of notable historic sites we have in this entire country, that's not actually particularly tolerant. So there has to be give and take. I do think, however, you know, when you get, like, religious freedoms, prayer, there will be people on the right when it comes to Islam who would be very, 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 very tough on that stuff. And look, you can call me a wet Tory or whatever the hell you want. I get uncomfortable with that. But I think in this specific instance, it feels a little bit too much. But Kemi's point, the politics here is right, because this is a side issue. This is Keir Starmer shamelessly deflecting.
Correct.
And look, Nick, and I think Kemi and PMQs was brilliant the other day. Not that everyone watches that, but you know, if he thinks that applying pressure on Kemi Badenoch's going to result in her sacking Nick Timothy. I mean, what a joke.
Absolutely
no chance.
Right. I wonder whether, Oscar, it's just as simple as, and again, you have to kind of choose your words carefully because we live in sort of sensitive. Is it a cultural clash? Is there something about seeing 600, whatever it was, the numbers seem to differ wildly. However, you know, hundreds of blokes praying on their knees in the name of the Islamic faith. I'm sure meaning no harm to anybody, but culturally, that sits in a place that feels sort of not particularly recognisable when you think of British culture. Now, if you see a load of Jews gathering, culturally, there is more of a synergy with that faith than there is with the Islamic faith. Is it that simple?
Yeah, I think to a degree. And look, I mean, I think even on its own terms, and I saw Andy Street, the old Birmingham Conservative mayor, talking about how, you know, it was really encouraged actually, and in football stadiums they'd have them and blah, 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 blah. I think the context matters here. I think when integration is clearly such an issue in this country at the moment, that there are communities in this country that have no interest, actually. They live here, you know, technically, but they have no interest in, you know, British values and community and society and rubbing shoulders with people from different backgrounds next to them. They have no interest in that. I think that's the problem. And so if that wasn't an issue, then I think things like this, people would be maybe a bit more, okay, you know, turn a blind eye to that, that's okay, that's fair enough. But when integration or assimilation even, you know, which is slightly more progressed from that, it is such an issue in this country, that's when things like this stick out, I think, more. I don't know how to solve the, I mean, it's probably going to be one of the biggest facts at the next election, you know, how do we as a country pull together, you know, all these groups? How do we actually ensure British culture and values win? And depending on your politics, there are very different routes to that.
Indeed. Oscar, stay with us. More stories to come. And, of course, over to you as well. Should we just ban all public prayer? Is that what we'd have to do here? What is it about this particular display of public prayer or public, let's say, religious gathering? Or is it the praying? Is it the gathering or is it the prayer? Which one is it? And if it's the gathering, why does it sit in a different place from a Jewish gathering, which also happens on an annual basis in the same place, or Diwali, or a Christian festival? Well, the Christian thing we can explain because it is the religion of the country, so that doesn't need to be justified. But why does it differ on this? What is the specific reason where there is a little bit of uncomfortableness about this particular story? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Oscar Redrop is with us, former number 10 advisor. Let's move to this story, Oscar. This is, your classic Keir Starmer territory, of course, and he's been giving it Billy Big Potatoes on one of his favourite issues, that of, well, it's a civil war, I suppose you could say, breaking out over there amid fears that he's going to cave in on migration. He's facing a bit of a rebellion. He can't get it right for love nor money, and this is down to the fact that his party is very much divided. The internal division is between Labour MPs who want a tougher line on immigration, of course, and those who prefer a less stringent approach. But don't worry, because Keir has always told us this.
Only Labour will secure our borders.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Only Labour will secure our borders.
Only, he said that with a straight face, Oscar. Only Labour will secure our borders.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying at the moment what's going on because, and it ties into what we were talking about just before the break in terms of who's actually driving Keir Starmer. We had it with Iran. Whatever you think the best route is or was, he overlooked his defence secretary in favour of Ed Miliband. And on immigration now, he is kind of going around his Home Secretary, who I actually think in really difficult circumstances has definitely been the best of a bad bunch, I have to say. He's going around her now and is taking his lead on immigration policy from Angela Rayner. That, in sum, is the status and the authority that our Prime Minister currently has. It is utterly wild, it is ludicrous, and he... Mahmood Akay, particularly on stuff like indefinite leave to remain in terms of taking it from 5 to 10 years. She really, her credibility was on the line with that. She really made a big play for it. And I think quite rightly, I think if you want to be, if you want to be in this country, you want to be a British citizen, you've got to really want it. You got to have to really, this kind of, again, what we're talking about in terms of integration, you have to really give to this country. And I think she was brave and bold and right to do that. Keir Starmer is inevitably going to chuck her under the bus on this in order, in some crazed way, because it only buys him, a bit of goodwill and a bit of time. Ultimately, though, showing weakness. He's going to chuck her under the bus, and we're going to take our steer now on immigration policy from the left of the Labour Party and Angela Rayner in particular.
I mean, it's really just a calculation, isn't it, that Starmer's made and his team. They've looked at the numbers. I would imagine it's a spreadsheet. They've gone, right, this amount of people will support you if you take that position, this amount if you take that position. There's no point in trying to go a bit reformy or a bit Tory-like. It's not going to work. Go left. It's your only option.
Well, I know, I agree, but in an ideal world, hey, how about doing the policy that is best for the country?
That'd be a nice idea.
That would be a nice idea. And look, I don't want to get too kind of, because it happens, unfortunately, to all governments and all prime ministers when they are really, really weak. The gallery you play to stops being your listeners and the electorate and the people of this country and what they need and want. And it becomes your backbench MPs because your political capital is so low. Yeah. And that in many ways, there's not a lot that always ends in tears. You can buy yourself time, but ultimately 9 times out of 10 it's in order to please your backbench MPs, you're actually going against the will of the country, and that will always come back to bite. I mean, I kind of long for the days where our equivalent of that, when Boris was at number 10, was despite COVID and all the payments that were made and all the money that had to go into things like furlough, the Tory backbenchers were getting really animated on lower taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes. That was our equivalent with Boris, and and we were desperate to, but the money just wasn't quite there at that moment in time. This equivalent, I think, will be that lefty kind of softy stuff, exactly like the conversation we're having around Nick Timothy. They'll love that, and it will be immigration. There'll be a real softening on immigration as well. Yeah. And your listeners, if you thought Keir Starmer kind of cosplaying as a tough guy on immigration, if you thought that wasn't getting you results, I mean, it's only going to get worse.
Absolutely. Let's move to the other side of the pond. This is the Oval Office meeting that Donald Trump had with the Japanese Prime Minister. Bit of an ill-timed Pearl Harbor joke, as some people have put it. The former president's, well, I don't think he's the former president, I think he's the current president's comments created an awkward... How did that get in there? Created an awkward atmosphere when a reporter asked why Japan, a NATO ally, wasn't informed of the planned US strike on Iran. Let's have a listen to what he said.
We went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay? Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay? Right? You know, he's asking me, no, you believe in surprise, I think much more so than us. And we had to surprise him, and we did.
It's kind of interesting that, because Trump realises there's not a lot of laughter there, but in a weird way, I mean, he made the right point, didn't he?
I mean,
just unfortunately that the Japanese Prime Minister was sitting next to him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can be, you know, I can be like Rory Stewart here and say, God, this is just the, you know, how can you conduct yourself like this in the Oval Office? And it's just so disgraceful and outrageous. Ultimately, for a lot of people, it was actually quite funny and does address a bit of an elephant in the room. And he is that kind of guy. Look, there's no one else like Trump.
But isn't it
like
a perfect analogous moment?
Kind of,
I mean, he's talking about surprises. I mean, that Pearl Harbor was that. What happened in Iran was a kind of sort of not dissimilar military surprise.
He's very much factually correct on that front. And look, it's what he does, right? He will, in order to kind of, it's the old, but a version of his power play is, I'm going to say the, in inverted commas, unsayable thing here. And you're all going to sit there and I'm going to get away with it. And hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to deliver it in a way that no one else can. And it's actually going to be quite funny. Of course, we can have a more serious discussion about is that how you should conduct foreign diplomacy?
True.
You know, what's going on with Iran, blah, blah, blah. But just in the clip itself, we can add that to the Trump scrapbook, you know, from 2016 to, you know, whenever it ends.
Yeah.
It was, I honestly, I was drinking, I had a Sprite, a very fizzy Sprite, and I saw it and I snorted and all the bubbles went up my nose.
Oh, the bubble moment with the Sprite. There's nothing worse than one of those. And courtesy of Donald Trump, it was. Yeah. It is that. Yeah. Oh my God, he's actually said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you this, by the way. Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of Twitter. 20 years it's been going. Now called X, of course. Is the world a better place because of Twitter? Are we more informed? Do we have greater freedom of expression because of Twitter?
Two things I think can be true at the same time with this one. We are more informed. I think it has allowed people to speak more freely.
Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant thing. However, it is also sometimes a cesspit. And I think we should all sometimes, especially with the weather's getting a bit nicer now, take a deep breath, touch some grass, look at the sky, and just remember that not everything is quite as gloomy or intense as social media lets you find. But ultimately, a brilliant thing. Honestly,
that's a nice one. Do you say touch some grass or smoke some? I didn't quite catch that.
Definitely don't smoke some and then tweet. I think that's where a lot of people get into trouble over the years.
Late night tweeting. Listen, Oscar, great to have you with us as ever. Thank you. Have a cracking weekend. He's Oscar Reddrop, former senior advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister over there at Number 10. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Do we now just ban all public prayer? I think that would be... I mean, there's not a lot of public prayer goes on, let's be honest. When was the last time, you know, you pitched up in Birmingham or Liverpool or London and suddenly saw a crock of cardinals on their knees having a prayer in or a prayer out, whatever it was. 0344 499 1000, your thoughts on that. John says, Public protest Islamic praying is done only to cause a reaction. It has no place in the UK. Not a huge fan of religion. However, it has its place. But after spending 5 years working in the Middle East, I don't believe Islam has any place in the UK. It is misogynistic, political takeover cult. Now, of course, many Muslims would go, well, that's not what I do. I just go to the mosque. I live a peaceful life. I keep within the law. I've got certain religious beliefs, and I run my life, but it doesn't affect anyone else. And that's where, what Oscar was just saying, that thing of two things can be correct. That's not sitting on the fence. I think that's the reality of where we're at on this one. But your thoughts on that prayer? Why does it distinguish itself for you from other gatherings of different religions? Because that's the central question here, right? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. A lot of response on this one. Mark says, this is the only religion that are having special laws created to stop any criticism. Jews, Hindus haven't carried out multiple terrorist attacks on people in this country. That's why people don't want to see this. They know the direction of travel, and that is a sense that many people kind of feel about this. And, again, it's that 2 or 3 hat thing that you can wear on this one. Is it just that it informs us that this is a faith that in its worst forms has clearly been challenging and devastating in the name of that faith, even if it doesn't mean that everybody that follows that faith clearly would hold those views. You can't lose that image of it. It's got a PR problem, shall we say. Kemi Badenoch suggested Sir Keir Starmer is courting Muslim voters over this row. This follows the Prime Minister's Wednesday demand that the Conservative leader fire Tory official Nick Timothy, who called that gathering in Trafalgar Square, the mass Muslim prayer event, an act of domination and division. Do you see it that way? Do you share that? Let's speak to Theo Hobson, theologian and author. Theo, good afternoon to you. I mean, it's kind of nuanced, it's multi-layered, this. That's not a get-out. I think there's quite a complex argument underpinning all of this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's a complicated issue, and I think the party politics is not very helpful to sort of slag each other off over it. We got to be a bit more thoughtful, a bit more careful, and see the bigger picture. It's a very complicated issue of whether religion should be in public space at all. And forget Islam for a moment. Should any religion be in worshipping in public square? A lot of people would say no. And I think we have to be careful with any religion, especially a minority faith with a political dimension, let's say. And in the past, it used to be Roman Catholicism, used to be the dangerous religion for hundreds of years. It was seen as not allowed to be expressing itself in public. And we developed traditions that were limiting of it and quite careful that not to allow it to be too publicly strong. And in a way, we've got the same sort of situation where it actually matters a lot how we react to this. because we need to encourage Islam to develop in a more liberal way. And we can do that through carefully allowing it public space, but with due care and vigilance.
I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that there are other gatherings. There's a Jewish festival that's happened, I think, for 17 or 19 years in Trafalgar Square. Sadiq Khan also attends that. It's not really a prayer thing, though. Is that the distinguishing? I mean, there's lots of other festivals where, you know, people have candles and lights and food stalls and things celebrating a particular day or moment. This is... It seems specifically the prayer bit, seeing hundreds of men on their knees praying.
Yeah, it is.
Optically does feel, I get what Nick Timothy was saying, even if you disagree with him on this one. I understand what he means by that. There's something quite potentially dominant about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to have the debate. And I think I don't agree with him that it should not be allowed ever, but it should be limited. I think once a year of that sort of prayers in public is okay, as long as we ask questions about it. Maybe next year we say, actually, we expect a integrated rather than segregated men and women together. And that might raise interesting questions. It might encourage a more liberal form of Islam to step forward and say, yeah, we want to be part of this, part of the public square. But I do agree with you that it's a bit different if it's Muslim prayers than a more kind of cultural gathering. Like you get Diwali or Chinese New Year, all sorts of cultural and national gatherings that are inclusive and people mill around and join in with the music. And it does feel a bit different because it's such a strong identity, Islam, and it does have a political dimension in terms of it having historic difficulties with secular liberal values.
I mean, that's
and we
it,
have to
isn't
be
it,
honest
really?
about that.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people got in touch, said, look, you know, nobody's suggesting every Muslim has these awful views, but, you know, if you look at recent stories, whether it's grooming gangs, whether it's the issue of recent terror attacks, Manchester, Westminster, 7/7, I mean, the list goes on. These are all associated with that faith, and therefore, even with the best will in the world, you can't sort of unsee that when, you know, when considering this question.
Yeah, that's right. I think we do need to have this debate, and I think it's unhelpful that the Prime Minister weighed in so strongly criticising Nick Timothy, although, as I say, I don't entirely agree with Nick Timothy. But I think there is too much nervousness of discussing this stuff, and politicians they're out of their depth, basically. They don't know enough about religion and culture to really say anything useful. I'd like to see the Church of England stepping in and saying something, because it's the established religion, and if we're going to have religion in public space, it should not necessarily be in charge of that, but it should be the dominant force, and it should have something to say about that. And it should make sure that it does things in public space that are representative of, you know, about 50% of the country rather than, you know, 8%.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think Christianity, what some might see as the downfall of Christianity or the certain dilution of Christianity, is really down, in many respects, to the inactivity of Christians.
Yeah, and well, in fact, we had the rallies last year, if you remember, with Tommy Robinson doing the, you know, kind of right-wing Christian join up of those two forces. And, you know, I think there's questions about whether that should be encouraged or allowed as well. So anything that mixes religion and politics in public space, we should naturally be careful of and wary of and have a debate about. And that's not Islamophobic. That's just perfectly within our tradition to be a bit careful about what sort of religion is expressed publicly.
Yeah. Oh, it's a massive question. Theo, listen, lovely to have you on with us, sir. We will speak again, I'm sure. Theo Hobson, theologian and author on that question. Yeah, if you mix the two, I mean, can you completely separate religion from politics? I mean, I think there is perhaps the guide to getting to the root of this question, right? because I don't think you necessarily can. If you look at in America, somebody like Charlie Kirk, who was publicly assassinated for his views, and his views did cross over between politics and faith unashamedly. That's what it was all about. And then, sort of over here, we had a sort of kind of plastic right-wingers sort of almost pretending they were suddenly newfound. The last Christian people on planet Earth were proclaiming that they are somehow in touch with the word of God and Jesus. Let's speak to Jonathan Sacerdoti, who's the writer and broadcaster, on this same question, Jonathan. I mean, it's an interesting one. I didn't realise this prayer thing in Trafalgar Square has been going on for, I think 2013 is when it first happened. Nobody really mentioned it until couple of days ago, but it's gathered prominence and it's gathered a debate, and it was triggered into a different stratosphere by Nick Timothy, ricocheted by Nigel Farage, batted back by Kemi Badenoch, and Keir Starmer cried his eyes out. So everybody's involved in this, it seems. What do you think?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for Nick Timothy, as I wrote in my column in The Spectator, and I think it's because he I would say quite sensitively and respectfully, but also boldly and in a direct manner, brought up a subject that lots of people in this country, and in fact in many other countries around Europe and elsewhere in the West, are aware of, want to talk about, and are afraid to do so. And there's a good reason they're afraid to do so. That is because there is an increasing tendency to try to forbid them from doing so. Initially, the fear came from if you criticised Islam, you might end up getting your head chopped off. And then it came from, if you criticised Islam, you might end up being arrested and put into jail for some kind of new modern blasphemy law. The fact that our current government has made this new definition of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hate, as they called it instead, and said that it wouldn't be something that stopped people from criticising Islam. It would be something that would be intended to stop people from persecuting individual Muslims. And yet the Prime Minister, the very Prime Minister behind it, launched this tirade on Nick Timothy for doing exactly that, for critiquing from his view, which was not an uninformed view, what it means to have mass public prayer of men in Trafalgar Square in the Islamic tradition with the words that they are saying in those prayers. That is not a personal attack on individual Muslims. That is a critique of Islam and some of the practices that it's putting out today within London, in Great Britain. And so I think it's a completely valid thing, even if you disagree with him. And I think this really drove home to many people that this is a subject you're just not allowed to talk about, not by many in the Muslim community and not by, now it would seem, our government.
Indeed. And is it because Islam is very overtly a kind of cultural belief that there is a sort of an obvious front and centre lifestyle that goes with that belief? It therefore has incursions into those that follow Islam to their worldview in a way that kind of maybe differs certainly from Christianity and Judaism, not exclusively, but broadly speaking. Is it a cultural thing that's uncomfortable for many when you see hundreds of men, and it's all men, on their knees praying? Is it because it has other implications beyond just the religion?
I think it's a very difficult one to unpick, but I would say it's partly that. I would say also many people don't like Islam. They don't like the ideology. They may feel that way from a prejudiced and uninformed or uneducated perspective, but they may also feel that way from a very well-informed, educated perspective about the faith. I mean, if you read this book, this is the Quran, I would suggest people do read it cover to cover. They might have opinions on it. I've got bookmarks in here for some of my favourite bits about my faith, Jews. There's an awful lot in there that isn't very nice about us. There's an awful lot in there that's not very positive towards non-believers in Islam generally. So the point I'm making is that I know it's controversial for me to be saying this, and it shouldn't be. What I'm saying is read their holy book. It's available. Read it in English in translation. find out what you think about it, study their faith a bit, and then if you have a discussion or a debate about whether or not there are central or fundamental parts of that faith, that ideology, that method of thinking, and that politics, which it also contains, which are not compatible with the country you live in, your laws, your values, the things that you think are important in life and respect for all humans, then you should be entitled to say so. And you should be entitled to be wrong and have a debate with people who might persuade you otherwise. And I would say that a faith that forbids you from doing that is not trying to persuade you otherwise. I would also say I don't understand why, personally, and maybe someone can tell me, you would want to go and pray on the dirty streets of London, why you would want to do something that is meant to be sublime and spiritual in a public place like that, especially with the knowledge that because there are adherents to your faith who slaughter people regularly in cities like our own and around the world, because there are people who recognize that that has happened and they've used your faith to justify it, even if you think they were wrong or misrepresenting it, or you don't agree with them. Why would you go and do something that makes people afraid and alarmed in a public place like Trafalgar Square? I would suggest for some people it might be, and I say might, because you know it's going to alarm them. And I think that is what Nick Timothy was pointing towards, that this may be a deliberate or non-deliberate form of domination and alarm put on other people. Let's talk about it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. Jonathan, thank you. Some cracking points there as well. Jonathan Sacerdoti, the writer and broadcaster. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Paul in Fife says, Ian, this question must continue to be asked. Why are we being subjected to laws and hate crimes specifically created to protect an imaginary threat to Muslims and to silence any criticism? It's astounding that the one religion which has largely been responsible for 95% of all terror attacks worldwide in the last 30 years is the one religion being protected by successive British governments. I could understand if Islam was under daily attack by British people. I could understand if Islam was indeed the religion of peace whose followers treated all other religions with respect and tolerance. If the followers of Islam embrace the cultures of the countries they choose to live in. But the opposite is the case. Where were the peace-loving Muslims after the Manchester Arena bombing? Were they on the streets screaming, "Not in our name"? Where were they after the slaughter of Lee Rigby? Total silence from these communities that we are now forced to live alongside and in many cases defer to. We are heading to civil war. Cost of living, net zero, unemployment pales into insignificance against the real threat, which is Islam, says Paul. What's interesting about Paul's comments there, in the world, the imaginary world of some Labour MPs, Paul would be in a set of handcuffs right now because he's criticised Islam. And he would have broken the new Islamophobic rule, and it's not about that. Apparently, it's something more. They had a different description of it, didn't they? They didn't use the word Islamophobia in the. So that's the kind of nonsense world we are in. For anybody to suggest, even if you didn't agree with everything Paul has just said there on that text, but for anybody to suggest, firstly, he's not allowed to say it or think it, or that there's nothing in what he just said, would be lunacy. There's a lot in what Paul in Fife has just said. Great message, Paul. Thank you for that. It's 10 to 2. Over to your calls in just a moment. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And this in from Pauline Redding says, I wish there was a button I could press to pause the world for just 1 hour so we can see what we are doing to each other. Why can't we all get on? Why is religion the only thing that splits us up as humans? Be kind always, says Paul. It's funny, isn't it, that when all the kind of Monty Python stuff was, and I'm sure it predates that, you know, satirising religion has been a rite of passage. So I'm tempted to say the printing press. I think the printing press, when people talk about, you know, greatest inventions of our time, and someone says, oh, it's the microwave oven or the dishwasher or clearly the computer, I think the printing press usurps all of that, because obviously largely the world, or the country we live in certainly, was guided almost exclusively by the church. It allowed no dissent, no voices or opinions that differed from the word of the good book, etc. The printing press changed all of that. Suddenly people were allowed to publish, they were allowed to write words, they could be shared around, people saw alternative views, satire, maybe many years later, kicked in. Shakespeare was doing it brilliantly, but of course in more modern times things like the Monty Python thing, they got a bit of jip of course, and some stick about things like the Life of Brian, that it was blasphemous and all of that. But the point was, they were really, it felt to me back then that Monty Python was reflecting an era that has gone. That business about religion and people arguing over faiths and fictitious prophets and gods and all this old caper, that was the past. So that's why Monty Python and the like were quite relaxed about lampooning this kind of stuff, because it's not a thing anymore. And yet here we are in the 21st century, and man, has it become a thing again. It's back in all its forms. Don't go away, Matt, with you in a second. This is Daniel in Epsom. Daniel, how you doing?
Ian, hi. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on and why it's getting the reaction, and no one else will tell you quite like I will today, right? What you don't realise is the British majority, so most native British people know and realise that mass immigration from the third world, particularly the Islamic third world, is destroying the fabric of Britain. It's ruining our country, okay? And we voted for over 30 years against mass forms of immigration, and we've been ignored, and we've watched our country go down the Swanee, decline and degradation before our eyes. So we've now got a group of men just dragging along their mats and praying in our capital city at a landmark, and it's like rubbing it in our faces. We don't want it. We've never wanted it. And if I was in charge, there'd be assimilate or leave policy.
How do you define assimilate, though? I mean, how does that... So the other thing that's great about being British is freedom of speech and, you know, the ability to think differently from other people. I mean, you might, Dan, suddenly go one day, if you know, in a different world. I've been reading up on all the faiths. I'm quite enamoured by this Islam thing. You know, should the country stop you from doing that?
No, but I think we should have a set of rules that we live by. And I mean, how if you think about Stockport, right, and you think about the atrocity that happened there, and you think about, I mean, we've imported FGM, honour killing, sham marriage, suicide bombing, the full vow, grooming gangs, cousin marriage. We've now got lone wolf attacks. Every day when you read the newspaper, there's a native Briton being attacked by someone from the third world. You know, these are undeniable facts. These are happening before our eyes and against our wishes. We didn't want it. And now we're seeing them with their prayer mats in our capital city, basically rubbing it in our faces. We didn't want these levels of immigration in the first place. We've been voting against it for about 30 years. And I'm watching the steep decline of my own country, particularly my capital city, before my eyes. And
what I didn't know, Dan, was that this prayer thing apparently has been going on for 13 years. I'd never heard of this, but it's a regular annual thing. Why do you think this stuff has suddenly become? Is it because people have got to a point when, you know, they've just noticed it, or is it, you know, are they exhausted by multiculturalism or multi-religionism? What's the deal there?
I think the native British population have just had enough of, you know, of the sheer volumes of people coming in. As I say, no one wanted it, no one asked for it, but it's here, and now we're seeing the steep decline in our society before our eyes, and we didn't even want it. We got people, you know, thousands of men praying in Trafalgar Square. You know, you said at the start of the show, should we treat Islam different to other religions? Yes, we should, because the terrorist threat is from the Islamic faith. You know, the lone wolf attacks are from the Islamic faith. Little girls are getting stabbed in preschool, right? We do have to treat them differently because they behave differently, and they won't assimilate. They won't assimilate, Ian, and we need something drastic happening.
All right, Daniel, powerful stuff, spoken with real passion. Daniel in Epsom. Let's get a word in from Chris in Grimsby. Chris, we've not got long, but I know you can do it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's short and sweet anyway, but it's just I was slowly getting chipped away at with the push for, you know, we need halal meat, don't eat during Ramadan, you know, the praying in Trafalgar Square. And then I went to Euro garages this week to bought some stuff. Went to get a pack of beer as well. I says, "Where's your alcohol?" They went, "We don't sell it." I went, "Oh, right." So something like a convenience store within a garage things we expect, all of a sudden that's gone.
They decided that they didn't convert for religious reasons. Yeah, I remember Anjem Chowdhury, the now jailed terrorist who recently, yesterday, I think, failed in his appeal to have his case either reheard or sentence reduced or something. He was once agitating to have alcoholic sponsorship removed from, I think it was, I can't remember which team it was. I think it was a Scottish team. And he didn't want that. And I remember thinking at the time, a ball has started to roll here, and you've just brilliantly articulated why it's still rolling, Chris. Thank you, mate, for that. Chris in Grimsby, more comment on the way. Is it the culture thing? Is it that? Is it politics meeting religion? For some, many getting in touch, it's just any display of religion publicly is not okay. 0344 499 1000. Do we just ban all public prayer? Our lines are open. We're going to get the news at 2. Back with more from you coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk. Yeah, welcome back home. A Common Sense. So much to get through, and so many elements to this public prayer story as well. Kemi Badenoch saying that Keir Starmer is simply courting Muslim voters amid this row over the Trafalgar Square praying. This follows the PM's Wednesday demands that the Conservative leader fire Tory official Nick Timothy. He called the mass Muslim prayer event an act of domination and division. Is he right on that? What is the answer in a free country where protest and, you're meant to be able to do your own thing? That's what us Brits are about. Do we ban it? Do we ban all prayers? Where do you go with this one? We'll have more details and comments from you on the way. Also, Keir Starmer faces internal Labour division over his migration policy, with some members urging a stringent approach and others advocating a significant softening, potentially moving closer to a kind of EU position. Your thoughts on that, and we'll discuss the issue on that Labour civil war in just a moment. And we've seen the grim financial headlines. A surge in inflation and multiple interest rate hikes are expected throughout the course of this year for British households. This is, of course, a direct consequence of soaring oil and gas prices triggered by the war in Iran. More on that story as well. We will bring you everything that you need to know. Naturally, any breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Mark says, reference the prayers. This is the only religion that are having special laws created to stop criticism. Jews, Hindus haven't carried out multiple terror attacks on the people of this country. That's why people do not want to see this. They know the direction of travel. It's interesting, isn't it, that there's things you can't unsee. You can't pretend. Look, we all understand it. If you look at like 7/7, 21st of the 7th as well, both of those cases were solved as a direct. When I say solved, I mean we knew what the heck had happened, but the information that was needed to confirm, exactly who those involved were, and when they were looking for the 21st of July bombers that didn't die, now in jail, that only came really from the help of those people's own family and their community. So there was no kind of like the entire Muslim world would go, no, don't talk to the police, don't talk to the... I think in the 21/7 case, I think it was one of the potential bombers' brothers or something that said, no, this is who you're looking for. So this idea that you tar everyone with the same brush is clearly an anti-intellectual position. Simultaneously, you can't just extrapolate people who carry out horrendous attacks in the name of a religion. You can't remove that from this discussion. So there are 2 or 3 different hats you might want to wear. It's not about fence sitting. If you want to get to the, where the root of this story or the confusion of this story, the mixed reaction to this prayer story, then there is quite a lot to tuck into. Thankfully, you're there with loads of calls, and we'll come back to those in just a moment. Now, Keir Starmer facing a bit of a civil war. This is over immigration. This one, isn't it funny how this has haunted all parties? Normally the Tories are really torn apart by Europe. Labour are torn apart by many other things, but certainly immigration is central to everything right now. So you've got internal divisions, Labour MPs who are demanding a tougher line on immigration. Shabana Mahmood thought she'd come up with a raft of ideas that might address this issue. People like Angela Rayner came along and said, no, you can't do that. It's un-British. It's not very nice indeed. Keir Starmer, however, reckons he's always been on it.
Only Labour will secure our borders.
Only Labour will secure our borders. Let's speak to Kevin Marr, former Labour advisor, and Benedict Spence, political commentator. Afternoon to you. Firstly, Kevin, good afternoon. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Good as gold at this end. Nice to have you with us. Only Labour can secure our borders, said Keir Starmer. Do you believe that?
It's a pretty tall order for any government to claim they're going to secure the borders, because the things you would need to do are pretty severe in and of themselves. I think you've got to start with the immigration issue, and you're right, it drove the Tory party mad. It's driving, and it will drive the Labour Party mad as well, because it requires very firm action, very, very firm intent from ministers who are having people biting their ankles and saying, don't do this, or there'll be some consequence, or it will upset my liberal sensibilities, or whatever. So it's very hard to get the politicians to hold the line on taking action, notwithstanding the fact it's very difficult to make any inroads into the issue at all anyway, because we've got obviously legal issues, we've got humanitarian issues, and we've simply got volume issues. 30 years ago, the issues we faced were very different. We faced issues around the free movement of people when we were inside the European Union. People from anywhere in Europe could come and live here and settle here and all of that, which is why we ended up with Brexit. And that should have been the point, really, for everybody in our political elite, in the red team, the blue team, the yellow team. They should have recognised at that point that's what Brexit represented. People were not happy with how our country was being run, and we're not happy with the volume of people that were coming into it, changing the character of the country. They should have listened to that, they should have respected that, and they should have acted upon it. Now, the Tories are where they are today because Boris Johnson just opened the doors and we ended up with the Boris wave and all the rest of it. So all the East Europeans left, and then we've got everybody from the rest of the world coming here for cheap labour. Now, Labour's got the mantle now. Keir Starmer, 12 months ago or so, made that infamous, depending on your point of view, speech when he talked about us being an island of strangers. And, that's pretty much, I suspect, the centre of gravity of the British public. That's what they think too. And in a sense, he chimed perfectly at that moment. Then, of course, a couple of months later, he recants from it completely, saying, it was a terrible phrase and redolent of Enoch Powell and all the rest of it, which it wasn't. And as a result of that, sends mixed messages about what Labour will do. Now, Shabana Mahmood comes in as Home Secretary, a Muslim woman, it's not lost on anybody, that's got some pretty tough things to say about immigration, the state of the country and what she's going to do. And I think that the thought a few months ago was that she would get a fair wind to be able to actually just pick this issue up and do something with it. And now what we're seeing is that the issue of immigration is being used by others at the top of the Labour Party. Angela Rayner made a speech there a few nights ago, as you say, saying some of these measures were un-British, which is like, whoa, wait a minute, is un-British to have an immigration policy? Because ultimately, with immigration, there are only three policies you can have. You either think there's not enough of it and it's great, you think there's too much of it and there should be less, or you think it's about right. There is no one in the country that thinks it's about right. There are people on the Liberal left who think, yes, let's have more of it, please. And the vast majority of the British public who are saying, we don't want any more, it's affecting too many things that we value in our country, and we'd like rather a lot less of it. And if politicians in the blue team have had to learn the hard way, if the red team now has to learn the hard way as well, then there's a lot of Labour MPs going to be looking to clean up their CVs for the jobs market in 2029.
It's interesting. You mentioned the Liberal left, although I would say that it's not just the Liberal left. If you look at, there was the Blair kind of wave thing. There was the Blair thing. Of course, the open borders, EU, people moving around. But actually, David Cameron was very relaxed about all of that. He was almost in exactly the same skin as Blair. Boris Johnson was very relaxed about that. I don't know whether it's a kind of a slightly old-fashioned view now that those guys thought, immigration, it comes and goes. People see it sometimes. It's sometimes very visual, channel crossings, but broadly speaking, it kind of works. It's the way the world is. And they were relaxed about it. They didn't have those kind of arguments. So it does cross in that Venn diagram. Tories, sort of what you'd call soft Tories, I suppose, as well as Labour. But then, of course, there's the other problem that I think the left have. Maybe it's the Angela Rayner thing, where to have any opinion against immigration, I don't know whether it's something in the DNA of a certain part of left-wing thinking. It's just not that you can't do it. You cannot have a view. It means you're a mad... You're like those... You might as well be Tommy Robinson if you're going to start having views on immigrants. That's how I think people like Rayner form these views, that it's completely against anything you could possibly be as a true Labour person to have a negative view on foreign people or brown people coming to this country.
I mean, there's a paradox here that this is a government, partly because of the pressures on defence spending, that has slashed the overseas aid budget, which was one of the great big core celebs, if you like, of the first Blair term, Claire Short as International Development Secretary, and the big commitment to 0.7% of GDP to international aid.
Yeah.
That went with a whimper, really. I mean, they've absolutely gutted the overseas aid budget. And the only way of approaching this issue, bearing in mind where the public is, and wanting to be humanitarian, is to say we've got to encourage people in the world that are very, very mobile. They've all got the internet, they've all got mobile phones, but could still be grinding poverty apart from that. They can see a better quality of life and they want to move towards it. We've got to push back against that and say, let's make the places that they are from more habitable and less horrendous, because that is the only way we as Britain, we as Europe, we even as North America are going to be able to stem this tide, because the levels of immigration that we're seeing today, and we have seen perhaps over the last 10, 20 years, could be nothing compared to what may be down the line if we don't do that. We've got to make, in a very non-colonial way, we've got to make North Africa and the east of Turkey, we've got to make that Europe, in as much as it's got to act as a buffer zone so that people do not need to step off their continent, and that they can have a better quality of life. And we can support Democrats, we can support human rights, we can create safe havens, safe zones, and bolster the economies of these countries at the same time, which would be good for trade anyway. That's the only real long-term way we're going to address this issue, because it will just keep coming at us. And the tools that any government has got are so blunt and so effectively useless.
Yes.
That all we're going to do is keep letting down the British public. And once you do that, the politics of red, blue, yellow moves to the politics of green, and it moves to the politics of whatever, not quite the colour scheme of reform.
Is it turquoise? I don't know. No,
is
it's
it
not
turquoise?
No, it's because it teal or something, isn't it?
It drifts to the political peripheries because people want action. And in a sense, what Labour MPs need to do is back Shabana Mahmood. This is last chance saloon politics these days on immigration. They've got to support her and stop picking at her, and stop trying to unravel the commitments that she's made simply because a few activists or a few trade union leaders or whatever to try and placate them in a leadership.
Indeed. I don't think she said anything particularly controversial in her proposals. You do get full house points for mentioning the name Claire Short there as well, Kevin, I have to say. Doesn't come up very often, Claire Short. I watched
very
that.
Good.
Yeah,
very
well,
good.
You know that Blair documentary that was on a couple of weeks ago? I'm sure you saw it, and I saw the list of people that were going to be appearing on it, and I thought, my goodness, these people are going to be like older than God's teeth. Jack Straw's going to look 150 and all the rest of it, and many of them did look old. And when I knew Claire Short was, I thought, my God, what's Claire? She was already, an older woman when she was in the cat. What's she going to look? She looked exactly the same.
She did.
She looked brilliant. Short hadn't aged a single bit. There we are. But of course, she famously legged it from Blair's government because of foreign policy. Kevin, thank you. Kevin Marr, great to have you on with us, former Labour advisor. Let's speak to Benedict Spence, political commentator. Good afternoon to you, Benedict. For some reason, I don't know why, I look at the world we live in, the capabilities we have in the 21st century. Elon Musk can fire a rocket up in the air and then get it to reverse, literally back into its pod. We can do crazy stuff with AI. Our phones just are beyond anything you could have imagined as a kid watching sci-fi movies. What a world we live in. We cannot, however, stop 600 blokes a week crossing the channel on a rubber boat. It's that issue of immigration, isn't it? For some reason, nobody can solve this. It's beyond, it seems literally beyond the wit of mankind, and Labour in particular are tearing themselves up over this.
Well, it's obviously not physically beyond our capabilities of doing it. It's mentally and for some reason morally, which is that I think that we're sort of stuck in a post-Holocaust existence whereby because of something that happened in the 1940s, everything now in the present has to be informed and equated to what happened in the 1940s. Of course, we all know that these are not the same things at all, but there is this bizarre sense that anything that even touches upon vague similarities, so people moving across borders, people being displaced, automatically means you are back in the 1940s, and that is, of course, the most evil thing that can possibly happen, and we must do everything we can to avert the same thing happening. Even though, of course, we all know that this is deeply dishonest. We all understand that this is not the same thing at all, but that's where we are. Practically speaking, physically speaking, of course, we can stop people coming in the numbers that they are. There is simply no will from our political class, and we must say, large numbers of the public as well feel very squeamish about this because of the world that they were brought up in and what they were taught about the evils of closing borders and of what they see as discrimination. But those numbers are turning. It's increasingly clear that perfectly ordinary people look at the sheer quantity and the impact that it's having on the resources of the country, and they recognize it's simply not feasible, A, to allow it to happen, and B, that it's actually not fair to allow people who are not, in fact, refugees fleeing war and torment to come and rock up and claim an economic improvement in their existence.
Labour have a particularly acute problem with this, of course. As I was saying to Kevin, our previous guest, there is something about having any negative view on immigration and therefore people from other countries, that a certain part of the Labour spectrum, quite a big part, just can't go there. They simply cannot go there. You never see, even when there's been horrendous terror attacks, you don't hear Owen Jones condemning these people or the element of their faith that you just don't hear it. They can't do it.
No, they can't, and that is because there is a sort of a willful blindness on their part. There's a hypocrisy that they are, of course, aware of, and they simply decide to keep stum about it. But there's nothing new about that in politics. People are always prepared to make exceptions for their own pet causes whilst raising hell about things that they disagree with. But we also have to be honest here. A lot of this is because of the process of legal migration to this country, the numbers of people that have come to this country, and how those people tend to vote, or at the very least how Labour and increasingly the Greens perceive them as voting. And frankly, as those numbers have continued to go up and ordinary people have sat there and gone, well, I don't want to be rude about anything, so I'm not going to speak out about this, they become an even more important part of our electoral patchwork. And, you know, you can understand that, therefore, actually, why it is in the interests of Labour to pander to these people, because as things currently stand, the doors are open, more of them are coming, and they're going to keep on voting for the party that gives them more stuff. So it does make sense, even if the rest of us sort of sit here and go, financially it's very irresponsible, and socially it's completely untenable.
Of course, Brexit totally destroyed, among many other things, totally destroyed the Conservative Party. Is this going to do the same for Labour? I mean, they're making a very good job of it themselves anyway, with a whole raft of rather bizarre, strange initiatives and policies. But is this going to be central, do you think, to the demise of Keir Starmer's government?
If they decide to row back on this fully, then yes. I don't see how it can be that they stood at the last election saying, oh, the Tories have lost control of immigration, we're going to bring the grown-up approach to smashing the gangs and securing the borders, and then go, oh, actually, no, we want more of this. You know, because we've had this before, haven't we? And it took people a very long time of repeated governments saying we're going to bring down migration and then levelling it, and then raising it up a level. What we see in the emergence of Reform UK is, it doesn't really matter about anything else, that is a diametric response to those years of betrayal. People will not tolerate Labour doing this. And the funny thing is, a lot of people who are on the left, on the far left, who are really pro-migration, they're probably not going to forgive Labour for lots of other things either. So it's not like they're going to pander to those people and win those votes back, because a lot of those people are going to vote Green. So yeah, Labour is sort of heading into a position where it's isolating its traditional working class votes, many of which are going off to Reform, and it's isolating its middle-class self-indulgence votes because they're going off to the Green Party.
Yeah, to coin a phrase, they're screwed. Benedict, great to have you with us. Thank you. Benedict Spence, political commentator with us here on Talk. But don't worry, when it comes to immigration, you've got no panic at all, because Keir Starmer's got your back.
Only Labour will secure our borders.
That's what he said. Only Labour will secure our borders. And when you've picked yourself up from laughing at that, you might want to bell us with your comments. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Breaking news. Martial arts and, artist and actor Chuck Norris has died yesterday morning at the age of 86. His family have announced on Instagram. Chuck Norris is one of those names that everyone goes, yeah, Chuck Norris, and not necessarily familiar with the full body of his work, but the name precedes him in that sense. He was a big deal, had a long career, massive, that whole kind of Bruce Lee era of martial arts flicks that were floating across the TVs for decades, absolutely central to that. So if you are a big, well, I suppose Hollywood and martial arts, kind of, that's your genre, then Chuck Norris would have been your man. We all remember The Way of the Dragon. Oh, yes. One of the favourites. More on that, of course. 86, yeah, it's not a bad old innings, is it, really? Chuck Norris dies yesterday, as we've just heard. And there'll be many tributes, I would imagine. Bruce Lee's not around, is he? I know that probably sounds like quite a naive question. Bruce Lee's definitely not around. I think his son, didn't his son do to sort of take over for a bit in that world? Those that are into that genre of films, like, are not just into it. My cousin of mine, when I was growing up, he was, still is to a degree, absolutely hooked on this stuff. All the kind of Enter the Dragon, The Way of the Dragon. The first time I ever saw any of those was courtesy of him. So he'll be much missed, but what a career. Chuck Norris died at 86. Back to your calls. We started, a bit of a gear change here. Should we ban all public prayer or just some public prayer? Selina is down in London. What are you making of this, Selina? Good afternoon.
I don't think this has any place here because it's not practiced in Muslim countries. Mm-hmm. Men do not pray in the square of any town, any village, any city. So I was brought up in Turkey. Mm-hmm. I've been living here for 38 years. So I know all about Islam.
So this wouldn't happen in, the middle of Ankara or something?
No way. Of course it wouldn't. First of all, like some of your other callers mentioned, including the journalist who wrote for The Spectator, Jonathan, I can't remember his surname now.
Sacerdote.
That's right. You cannot pray on a dirty road. You cannot.
Well, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? Yeah, you see, totally. I do wonder about that.
You cannot put your sejjade on anywhere there is shoes in that.
See, this is a really good point. It does absolutely authentically raise the question on this. So why would they be doing it then?
To make a point. They are politicizing it.
Right, so it's a political statement.
Now, Islam, I don't really care about any religions in the sense that I'm not religious. I don't mind what people believe in. I don't care. Poseidon, but whatever. But Islam is an unreformed religion. Nobody denies it. It's still in the 7th century.
Isn't that meant to be for those that follow it, isn't that the big thing? Because it's unreformed, it is seen as more authentic.
Totally. Maybe. Again, I'm not judging it, but what I am judging is this is a made-up thing. It's a show.
Okay.
It's a daring us, and it's being politicized, and unfortunately, Labour is falling for it. And I tell my friends, they will be the first to go if these people ever got into power. Angela Rayner will be the first to go. Like it happened in 1979 in Iran. The left flirts with radical Islam, and they are the first ones to be hanging from.
Yeah, because that's a one-way relationship, isn't it? There's no love of people like Angela Rayner from that particular rank, if you like, of Islam, of the Islamic faith.
They won't have them. No. There is no way. So this is dangerous. No shoes. You don't pray on a dirty street with dog poo everywhere.
I got it. Selina, thank you. It's an interesting angle, that, which would naturally lead you to conclude that there must be to surrender the sacred nature of prayer and the appropriate setting for it, which is why I would imagine some people carry a small carpet around with them to pray for that very reason. Were these guys praying on little carpets? I don't know. Jacqueline in Sheffield, on this same point of religious displays of religion, I suppose, publicly. Jacqueline, what do you make of it? Hi.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yes, I'm a practicing Catholic, and I do pray in my local park, but I'm walking the dog and I've got my rosary beads in my pocket and no one would ever know that I was praying, and it just helps me cope with various things in my life.
Sure.
Now, I grew up in the west of Scotland and bigotry was rife. I've had insults against my faith, against the Pope, and it's never bothered me because I've been confident in my faith, and people are free to criticise Catholics and the Pope if they like. So to me, this is just dominance. I just don't understand why they allow it to happen, and I've no desire to impose my faith on anyone else. Unless someone asked me about my faith, then I would talk about it, but not at any other time.
Do you think... if some, the Catholic faith, as you, I'm sure know, Jacqueline, has been through the mill a bit over the years for a lot of reasons. And so in one respect, do you have a sympathy with Islam in the sense that it's sort of going through the same public analysis on an almost daily basis? And do you think perhaps when somebody who is firmly of a theological position, that when they feel that position is under attack, they will come out stronger and more publicly?
I think everything has to be out in the open, and I think people have a right. I mean, they might feel under attack. I mean, I've probably felt like that, and a lot of Catholics have felt under attack with a lot of things that have happened in the Catholic Church, and a lot of things that were very wrong. And we have to own up to them that they're wrong, and say, no, not in my name. So I just think that, I mean, I've got Muslim friends and they're frightened to speak up about what's going on. I'm not frightened to speak up about my own faith, but I don't ever, go out and say I'm Catholic or whatever.
Sure.
And you can pray, as I do, with my little rosary beads in my pocket, but for my own personal things that go on in my life. And no one would ever know that I was doing that, but I get a lot out of it. I don't need to showboat to anybody. Yep. And that's my point on it.
I love it. Jacqueline, thank you very much. What a great call. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. It's often raised it's not quite an equivalence, but you are naturally very tempted to draw it from time to time between the abuse of children in the Catholic Church and the grooming gangs that has happened with Islamist practitioners in a whole variety of towns and cities in this country. What is the difference? Well, the difference is really rather simple. The latter, the grooming gangs, was ignored and covered. I mean, the Catholic Church, don't get me wrong, themselves covered it up right the way to the top, right the way to the Pope's doorstep. This stuff was covered up, and I've no reason to believe there's still many skeletons in the papal cupboard, if you like, on this one. But in terms of law enforcement covering it up, local councils, institutions, of course, you would have had back in the day, I'm sure kids would have gone home and said, we think the priest is abusing children, or, the priest touched me inappropriately. And there would have been an era where, a grandmother or a mother would have gone, stop talking like that with your wicked tongue. You'll go to hell. Because nobody would ever have believed, such is the gravitational pull of some people's religion and their emphasis on their religion. They couldn't possibly believe that was the case. In terms of the police or the local authority or social workers or medics or teachers even covering things up, that's the distinguishing factor between the two. But simultaneously, you'd have to be a nut job if you thought that, the grooming gang thing is somehow given the green light by every Muslim. I've lost count of how many Muslims I've spoken to that would have exactly the same view as a non-Muslim on them. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks that's okay. And of course, most Muslims would say, well, those blokes were not really practicing Muslims. They thought they had, well, they can't have been. They were drinking, they were taking drugs, they were doing all manner of things. There's nothing Muslim about them. But it's a confused picture. I can hear some people listening thinking, I could counter that argument. Well, if you want to, we're all ears. 0344 499 1000. Should we ban all public prayer or just the prayer of some faiths in this country? Your thoughts on that. Everything else we've talked about as well. Lines are open. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Ian in Glasgow says, sad news, reference Chuck Norris. He was very popular among us students back in the 80s. Delta Force was a particular classic of the action genre. By all accounts, a great guy too. Best wishes, says Ian in Glasgow. Absolutely one of those actors that I think most people have heard of, but those that liked Chuck Norris really liked Chuck Norris. He was like something a bit more than just martial arts actor guy. Those guys had just an incredible mesmeric effect on their fan base, as did all of those films as well. And I think mentioning Delta Force is probably right in the bullseye of what we're talking about here. Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. Here's an interesting one from Neil in Yorkshire. It says, just a quick note regarding street prayer. I work a lot in mosques as a plumber because of the number of showers and toilets, foot wash stations, etc. And one thing I notice is the amount of time spent washing feet before prayer. Also, this is really interesting. This is the only building in all of construction where we're not allowed to wear our steel toe cap boots. All shoes have to be removed at the door. Health and safety goes out of the window or the door of the mosque. That is fascinating. So you literally breach health and safety rules when working in a mosque. I had no idea that was a thing. That's according to Neil in Yorkshire. Neil, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, despite reducing overall foreign aid, Labour will still commit £6 billion over 3 years to international climate finance initiatives, aiming for an additional £6.7 billion from UK-backed climate and nature positive investments. So that's not the overall budget, that's just the climate element of it. Let's speak with William Yarwood, Media Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. William, good afternoon to you. I can almost see taxpayers gnawing off their own elbows when hearing this news. Not 600 quid, I could kind of get into that. 6 billion over 3 years, massive amount of money on climate finance initiatives. Do you know what they actually are, these things?
Not really, Ian. Well, first of all, good afternoon. Always great to be on your show. And I think this is just more virtue signalling from, indeed, the Foreign Office, who have control over this foreign aid budget. Look, let's get down to the actual statistics here. £6 billion is quite a decent amount of money. That is the lifetime taxes of around 4,700 households. So 4,700 households will be working their entire life just to pay off this bill. And when it comes to thinking about what the state should actually do and what the role of the state, I think there's fundamentally two roles. One, to defend the realm, and second of all, to put the interests of the British people first. And I'd like to ask Yvette Cooper and indeed the civil servants who came up with this scheme, which one of those does this fulfil from? Because from what I can see in, neither of those fulfillments of the state are being fulfilled by this foreign aid project. It's just a complete waste of money.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that, you know, a 10-year-old could have probably raised a flag on this one and said, are you absolutely sure this is like money well spent? I mean, if you're spending £6 billion on behalf of the taxpayer, or sending £6 billion on behalf of the taxpayer, you would think that, I mean, that department would have to be so rock solidly sure that this was going to the right place for something that is life-changingly crucial. I mean, these are telephone number kind of figures, William.
Yeah, indeed. But, like, if I'm perfectly honest with you, Ian, I have no faith in various government departments and indeed civil servants to know what is actually good use of taxpayers' money. I mean, this is not the first time we've seen something like this either. You know, I remember a little while ago there was a big hoo-ha about the foreign aid project funding a Kenyan sex health robot in Kenya. Then there was money being sent to Pakistan for the use of and promotion of contraception over there. Yep. There was stories about how money was sent to foreign countries to build infrastructure that either didn't work or wasn't needed. You know, there's endless textbook examples of this, and that's why we at the Taxpayers Alliance have constantly called for the abolition of the 0.7%, because that's in law, by the way, Ian. Like 0.7% of your gross national income needs to be spent on foreign aid. We at the Taxpayers Alliance have called for that law to be repealed and for the abolition of the foreign aid budget in its totality, except for genuine humanitarian crises where there is examples where British taxpayers' cash could possibly help out with an earthquake, a tsunami, you know, you name it. But look, foreign aid is just an endless cycle of silly projects, virtue signaling, and every single time something like this comes up, and we've seen many examples of it, like I said, I simply held my head in my hands and simply wonder what these civil servants are thinking, because it shows something deeper, that they just have no real respect for taxpayers' cash at all.
Indeed. William, thank you. Great to have you on with us as ever. William Yarwood, Media Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Woman 67 says, Ian, get off the fence. You'll get splinters. It was a misogynistic show of strength. This was about the Nick Timothy comment on the mass prayers in Trafalgar Square. I did say to you earlier, and this is the problem with the world we live in, some things are not, you're either that side or that side. So, there are 20 facets to this. There's no fence involved in this respect, because there's too many elements to it. When it comes to public display, I agreed, and I said it at the time, there is something dominating. I said at the beginning of the show, sometimes you can't put your finger on it, because, you know, we live in a weird world, don't we? We live in a world where we are encouraged, not just encouraged, many of us ferociously, actively advance the beauty of free speech, the right to protest. But I said at the beginning of the right at the top, it's a bit like when you have a protest for a subject that annoys you or you don't care very much. And I was thinking of the Just Stop Oil lot. So that protest annoys me. But then you get a pro-British rally, which I think is quite clearly full of jubilance and celebration of our flag, of our culture, of our history, all of that stuff. So that's good rally. Just Stop Oil people, bad rally. But that's only based on what I believe and agree with, right? So it's not a sensible position. You have to say, well, do you believe in freedom of speech, the right to protest, the right to show your faith or your religion, the right to prayer? You know, do we believe in all of that? And that's where it's tricky. That's why there is no fence on this, because I do believe in all of that, but simultaneously, I am uncomfortable with the hundreds of men on their knees in Trafalgar Square, and I can't fully articulate it. The nearest I can get to is that it's a cultural thing. There is something about that I look at, I don't recognise, I don't feel any great joy or love as a result of it. I'm sure these are all law-abiding, wonderful people. It feels at odds with British culture. It looks antiquated. It feels like an anomaly within the 21st century. There's something about it all. But what would make me a moron is if I just came bang down on one side of the fence or the other. It's about wearing multiple caps. There are no fences to see in this story. Ben is in Amersham. Ben, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Hello, I just want to say I'm more concerned with our politicians' reaction to what Nick Timothy said than the actual mass praying itself.
Great point. Go on.
If you go on X and Twitter, they're all saying how, it's against British values, what Nick Timothy's saying, and how he should be, well, some of them are saying he should be fired. I think that's absolutely disgusting.
I think Keir Starmer said he should be fired by Kemi Badenoch.
I don't really want to go on about Keir Starmer. He really boils my blood.
Yeah.
You know what is a British value, Ian?
Go on.
Free speech.
Yep.
And that's exactly what Nick Timothy used his free speech for, to criticise this. And I don't see anything wrong with what he said.
But neither do I, by the way. And if that's a sackable offence in the 21st century, then we might as well go and move to North Korea, frankly, where that sort of thing would get you in trouble. So Nick Timothy's free speech, yes. The people that were doing the praying, would we extend the same generous argument of free speech to them?
No. And I'll tell you why. We've had abortion clinic. We've had zones where Christians can't go and pray. There was a lady who was arrested for praying inside her head outside an abortion clinic.
That was, look, I'm not defending that, by the way, but that was something different, wasn't it? That wasn't about Christianity. It was about the intimidation of people going to abortion clinics. It might have been it's a bizarre and a very clunky way to do it, but that was the theory behind it. We also simultaneously had a copper the other day in East London, you might have seen, who was telling a group of Muslim guys, let the man preach with his Bible, because if you don't like what he's saying, clear off.
Yeah, those are good examples, but there's just loads of examples of Christians being persecuted. I'm an atheist, but there was another example of a lady who was singing church hymns outside a church. She was arrested.
I seem to remember something about that. I mean, I don't know what the hymns were, or was she a bad singer? I don't know. I vaguely remember the story.
There's been Christian preachers being arrested, and I think it's double standards.
But we do have, in Trafalgar Square, a massive Christian festival. There's also a Jewish festival there. There are other religions. I think there's a Hindu annual get-together as well. So are they all different to what happened with this prayer thing? I actually think they are different, by the way, but I know that would also annoy Labour MPs.
Yeah, I think they are different because there's been a slow erosion of our culture. We've got halal meat that's not labelled as such in supermarkets. You don't know what's halal these days. You've got schools closing for Eid. And I just think it's Easter eggs. They're not allowed to display the word Easter on them anymore. And it is a really worrying trend this country's going towards.
Who's not allowed to put the word Easter on an Easter egg?
But if you go into any supermarket and look at Easter eggs, they don't mention the word Easter.
Or do they just say chocolate egg?
Yeah.
But if I went to a supermarket website and searched up Easter egg, I would get an egg, wouldn't I?
Yeah, but on the actual labelling, it doesn't say Easter anywhere on the chocolate egg.
Do you think that's for that reason, or do you think, has it ever said Easter egg on the egg? I know that's a bizarre question.
It did used to say Easter egg.
Do you know, I honestly cannot remember. But you're right, I'm looking at a load of them now. Cadbury's mini eggs, Dairy Milk buttons, Maltesers, they're mini bunnies. That's a slightly different thing. But I don't know whether they did say... I don't know whether they did say Easter eggs before or not. Listen, Ben, you're going to leave that conundrum with us in that respect. There was a thing about Christmas trees, wasn't it? They didn't say Christmas tree, but they did on some of them. Some were being sold throughout the course of the year. Smarties. It does say in the description, Smarties milk chocolate Easter egg. And then there's a Celebrations milk chocolate Easter egg. This is on the Tesco website. Aero peppermint milk chocolate Easter egg with bar. Yorkie milk chocolate Easter egg. Cadbury white button shell egg. Oh, no mention. So no mention of the word Easter on that. But if you were in the store, it doesn't say it on the side of the packet. Let's have a little look. Milk tray, black magic. I'm just making them up now. But did it used to say, that's the question, did it used to say it? I don't honestly know. I can't imagine, look, it's a weird world. You're only selling that stuff really to people who, well, I don't even think you're selling it to people who celebrate Easter from a Christian perspective. It's marketing, isn't it? Did it ever say Easter egg or did it just say egg? And if you're marketing it, would you really remove the word Easter because you thought it was going to reduce your sales? Maybe you would. There's a conundrum we didn't think we were going to be debating. 0344 499 1000. Mark says Chuck Norris was that tough, even his fists had fists. I think you might be right about that. Lots more still to come from you. Voice of Doom on the way as well. 10 to 3, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. And some breaking news. As of the last 7 minutes, 8 minutes, it is officially spring. Thank you. Loads of people have been talking. Have you noticed it's a very British thing to do? that the minute the sunshine comes up, people think it's summer. I don't know why. And I was saying to this people in February, they go, oh, great, we're thinking of meeting in the beer garden after work, somebody said the other day. Like, it was like 2 degrees out there. It was just a bit of sun in the day. It wasn't a day that you describe as anywhere near summer. It wasn't even spring then, it was winter. But today, as of 2:46 this afternoon, officially, we are now in spring. Yes. Very happy about that. The daffodils, the bunnies, the what else happens in spring? What a rubbish season spring is, though, isn't it, really? It's just like, just get to summer. Come on, bring on. We want 25 degrees. Let's move on. We'll go back to the calls in just a second. Day 12 of The Voice of Doom. This, of course, is the mystery voice. But it's a politician you're looking for. Always a politician or someone obviously associated with the world of politics. For whatever party, could be dead, could be alive. One simple question, who is this?
There's hardly any experience.
Thus far, nobody has got it correct, clearly. Here it is again.
There's hardly any experience.
87222. Just message, don't call if you've got any idea who this is.
There's hardly any experience.
87222. And, of course, if we get a right answer, we'll tell you who it is. If we don't, it rolls over to Monday. One more time.
There's hardly any experience.
87222. Back to your calls. Jill in Cornwall. Jill, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Hi.
Lovely to see some sunshine, actually, but there you go.
Yeah, well, it's spring, isn't it?
Yes, but as soon as the weather picks up and everything, we start hearing about more crossings, more illegals and everything else.
That's true.
I'm so sick of this. I am so sick of this because nobody seems to be doing anything. And then you see articles on the news of Muslims in the street kneeling and praying and goodness knows what, courts and goodness. I mean, what I don't understand is if the people of this country feel threatened is the wrong word, but if the people of this country feel that they're at risk of losing the things that make this country what it is because of this sort of invasion, then nobody seems to be doing anything other than people like yourselves.
Well, I did have a message on Twitter from Mustafa, who was having a bit of a pop at me. Well, not so much a pop at me, a pop at, talk radio as a station. And he did make one point that I completely agreed with. He said, what these people don't get, people aren't becoming Muslims. I don't think anybody said they were, like, leaving Christianity, becoming Muslim. He said they're leaving Christianity for atheism. Atheism. Muslims aren't the problem. The church's ways and reform's hate are. Now, that's his view on reform, perhaps. But there is Christians, perhaps we have ourselves to blame on this a little bit. Why are the churches not fuller? Why are there people not having a more visual and public display of Christianity? What's happened there?
Well, I agree with you. The church don't do enough, as far as I'm concerned. And religion, there's nothing really specific about Christianity and religion. I used to go to church, but I don't anymore. But that doesn't make me sort of a non-Christian sort of person. I still have Christian beliefs in as much as, good thoughts, if you know what I mean, but I'm not a churchgoer. Yeah. And my concern is that if we allow, and it is if we allow Muslims to sort of take over this country in the way that they are doing, in as much as they occupy the streets, the police are having to accept things, they've got their own blessed legal courts where they deal with their own crimes and God knows what. If we allow that to happen, then whatever Christianity in this country, however we define that, it's going to disappear. We're going to lose it. And already, I think there are churches that are suffering as a result of lack of people coming to services and what have you. And I'm one of them. I don't go, but that doesn't make me a non-Christian sort of a person.
Okay. It's fair enough. Listen, Jill, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. Really appreciate it. Couple of comments on Easter eggs as well. This comes from Red the Linux, who says, regarding Easter eggs, the packaging hasn't displayed the word Easter since the 1960s. Some did in the 1980s, but very few. Here's a picture of the 60s and the 80s, and it's got the picture of the 1960s, little Easter eggs there. Cadbury's Easter egg, a milk tray filled Easter egg. Yeah, there's loads there. And then you look to the picture of the 80s. I know you can't see this. And it's all down to Dairy Box, Cadbury's buttons, Smarties. No mention of the word Easter egg. But apparently somebody else here, this is Jeeps, says that if you look at the back of an Easter egg, it does often say, and here's an example of a Cadbury's Dairy Milk one. On the back, it says, your Easter egg has been made with Cadbury's Dairy Milk. But apparently it's not been there for 50 years, the word Easter. So our sources tell us. Lots to come in the next section. Will we get a winner to the Voice of Doom? Here's the voice.
There's hardly any experience.
87222 if you think you know. Back with your calls in a couple of moments. Let's get the news headlines. The time, 3 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon into a nice spring weekend right here at the home of Common Sense. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock, we are responding to, well, it's that mass call to prayer, whatever you want to refer to it as. Big display of religious allegiance over there in Trafalgar Square. And, of course, it's caused a right royal row. Kemi Badenoch says Keir Starmer is simply courting Muslim voters. After that row, this follows the Prime Minister's Wednesday demand that the Conservative leader fire Tory official Nick Timothy, who called the prayer gathering an act of domination and division. So what do we do here? Do we just ban all public prayer, or do we look at the specifics of some religions? Or is it cultural more than religious? Is it political more than religious? Your thoughts on all of that? Also this afternoon, Keir Starmer faces internal division in his party over his migration policy. They can't quite get this one right. There are many in his party who are urging a more stringent approach, the Shabana Mahmood position. And there are others advocating a significant softening, potentially moving closer to a sort of EU position on immigration. It's eating the Labour Party up from inside to out. Thoughts on that too? And a surge in inflation and multiple interest rate hikes are expected this year for British households. It's going to be a tough year. This, of course, is a direct result of soaring oil and gas prices triggered by the war in Iran. It's not getting better anytime soon, it seems. I'm looking at those petrol prices well over the 150 a litre in many of the places near me. That's significantly up on the 130 it was just weeks ago. We'll have more on those stories and, of course, everything from you as well, plus all the breaking news. 0344 499 1000. Gary says Chuck Norris was that tough. Superman wore Chuck Norris pyjamas. I love that. And Christine says, I'm sure when I was a child, they said Easter egg on the box or Happy Easter or a Happy Easter message on the box. That's a good point. And Tim says, Tim's in Suffolk, 6 billion quid overseas aid. That's 12 to 14 city-sized hospitals. Derby and Coventry were 300 million each. Can I just correct you on something, though, Tim? It's not 6 billion in overseas aid. That's just the climate initiative bit. It's double that in overseas aid. So you might be in for a bit of a shock. Connected to all matters foreign-related, the US-Israel war against Iran, which started, of course, back at the end of February, 28th of February, entered its third week today. Strikes on military and state sites have reportedly killed over 1,300 people. A limited ground invasion began a couple of days ago on the 17th of this month, though a larger offensive would require significant troop deployment. Separately, our next guest, Amir Kotecha, resigned from the Foreign Office after 10 years, citing concerns about the department's mission to not put Britain first when dealing with wider world problems. He joins us now. Amir, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, it sounds like you encountered what I hear from many former civil servants, to look at it in that respect. I mean, you were a former diplomat, but those that have worked in that sort of groupthink arena, does that sort of roughly define the start of the problems here?
Yeah, I think, Ian, that's a good way of putting it, groupthink. I think there are certain shibboleths, certain cause célèbres that almost all officials in the Foreign Office sign up to, whether that's, following to the letter international law and a really rigid interpretation of international law, the automatic assumption that we should be spending vast amounts of British taxpayers' money in faraway places on climate transition and things like this. I think this sort of groupthink is a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah, and I disagreed with it myself. So, eventually I quit the Foreign Office after 11 years of serving my country, both in London and in diplomatic posts around the world.
What was it that you experienced some pretty wacky situations, didn't you, that seemed to be more important to staff than often the reality of what was going on around us?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I wrote a column for the Times where I gave some eye-catching examples of misplaced priorities, really.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about those.
Well, I said that, for example, when Kabul fell to the Taliban, with all of the impacts and implications that has for our national security here at home, I was invited to a World Afro Day celebration.
Really?
Along with several thousand other officials. I mean, this was not a small event happening in just the Foreign Office. It was a cross Whitehall event. And one of the people on the panel was a director charged with matters of national security. So I just thought, this is a telling example of how senior mandarins seem to have all of their priorities in the wrong place. And it was just one example, but there were many, many like it over the 11 years I spent in government.
Yeah, what happens on World Afro Day? I mean, I would assume it would be inappropriate for people to just suddenly turn up with an afro wig on. That wouldn't be allowed. That would be cultural appropriation, I guess. But one assumes this was all part of a wider diversity initiative.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a global day of, I think, celebration and liberation of Afro hair is how they describe it. Someone somewhere has decided that we need a World Afro Day. I don't think we do. But the point is that people in government, senior officials being paid by the taxpayer, shouldn't be entertaining this nonsense. And, the fact that it was happening at such a serious time when clearly the Foreign Office was at the very forefront of what was going on in Afghanistan and frankly not handling it particularly well.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a perfect example. But there were so many instances like this, Ian, of examples. And, I think the point I would make is this is not just woke sort of culture war mudslinging. I think it reveals something deeper, which is that the Foreign Office and other government departments are hopelessly distracted. They seem to be spending vast amounts of time focused on things that are not the core of their job. And that's the bigger point I wanted to make.
Indeed. My nearest brush with the civil service, Amir, was working for the BBC, which I suppose is technically kind of, you're working for a government organisation. I'd only been at this place for about 3 days, and we were doing a breakfast show, and we would have a post-show meeting. And on this particular day, the editor was away, and there was somebody else standing in. And the idea was to sort of debrief the show and talk about tomorrow's show. On paper, that all sounds fair enough. And we sat down, and there was about 12 of us, because, it's the BBC, so, why use 3 people who could adequately do the job when you could use 12? So there was that. And we sat down, and this fella at the end of the table said, right, everybody's here? And everyone, yeah, we're all here. And he said, can I just start by saying, is everybody okay? And I thought, what's happened? Has one of our colleagues died? And I haven't heard the news. Is everybody okay? And he sort of went round the table. Is everything okay? You got any problems? And I thought, what is this? What have I've clearly missed an email somewhere. Something's happened. No one's told me. But everybody just sort of diligently joined in with, yeah, absolutely fine. No, everything's good. Everything's good. And it was essentially an inquiry about everybody's disposition. Are you okay? Clearly this bloke had been on a course somewhere who said to him, every now and again, check in with your staff, make sure they're okay. It was the most bizarre thing. Nobody blinked, only me. I thought I was in the middle of a Monty Python sketch. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Is he okay? He's okay. Everybody was okay. It was brilliant. But what a curious... We're meant to be debating the editorial content and what went right or wrong on a show. And when I read your column on this, it felt very much that kind of thinking, that it was about everything but the actual job in hand.
I think you put it very well, Ian. And, that stuff is absolutely rife across the civil service.
Yeah.
It's this whole culture of bringing your whole self to the office. And the problem with it is, I think, managers resort to entertaining this sort of stuff because it's easier than grappling with the really difficult questions. It's much easier to exercise this sort of bland managerialism than it is thinking deeply about what we do to combat the threat from Russia or how we grapple with the challenge of China. So, there's this sort of fetishization of management competencies that, frankly, yes, people should be a good manager, but shouldn't come at the expense of really focusing on the hard-nosed foreign policy questions. And just by the way, you mentioned about 12 people being invited to a meeting that only required 3. Again, that's a huge problem in the civil service. There is a huge amount of bloat, and we invite dozens of people to meetings that only need half or even a quarter of that number, because there is this culture of absolutely everyone needing to be invited. And frankly, we could have a far more effective civil service with far fewer people.
Yeah, it breeds a culture, doesn't it? And the culture, and there's a legacy to the culture, and new people come in and they buy into the culture, whether they realise it or not. And instead of just being a workplace, people develop a different set of priorities, and they almost feel that they're part of some kind of club, that there's some sort of overt or subtle rules, whatever, in place that we all have to go by, whether it's asking constantly about how you are, or celebrating National Afro Day, whatever it was you experienced. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, were you an agitator? I don't mean that in an unkind way. Was it clear that you weren't always buying into these initiatives or this way of working?
Well, it's interesting, Ian. I mean, for example, I didn't even sign up to the Race and Ethnicity Committee or Race and Ethnicity Network that now exists in the Foreign Office. But I think one of the committee members must have just looked at my name, seen that I was an ethnic minority, and decided to add me anyway. So,
well, that's good of them. So they thought, oh, here's a brown man, let's put him on the list. He'll be fine with this.
Well, quite, because I seem to be getting invites to all of these things, like Islamophobia Awareness Month, or Windrush Day, or, as I said, World Afro Day. And I certainly didn't sign up to that mailing list. So I think this is the problem. There's an assumption, to come back to your original point, groupthink, that everyone must surely agree with this stuff. And that seems to be the operating assumption upon which the civil service operates. And look, I mean, the point I would make is, if this was, possible to have, while also focusing really deeply on the actual foreign policy problems of the day, then I think management would have a leg to stand on. They could say, well, fine, we can have our cake and eat it. But the argument I would make is that things aren't going well in the Foreign Office. We're clearly scrambling around at the moment trying to handle this Iran crisis. We were hopeless on Chagos, and if things carry on as the way they are currently, that bit of British sovereign territory is going to be given away. So things aren't all going swimmingly at the Foreign Office. And so I think the senior management need to take a step back and think, why might that be the case? And I think it's because they're hopelessly distracted by all of this peripheral nonsense.
Indeed. And it should be said, and I can't specifically speak for the Foreign Office, but I would imagine it's no different. These big government departments and organisations, often bring in outside kind of advice, eye-watering amounts of numbers to, train staff, have these kind of often wacky initiatives, things that are meant to be, I don't know, feel-good days, or meant to tick a box of diversity, or whatever the heck it is. And, these independent companies, we can, make your staff, we can ensure that none of your staff are racists. And you think, well, none of them are racist anyway. You don't have to spend £2,000 per staff member, because they're already, everyone's fine. No, bring in the company, because they're going to tell you how not to be a racist. Well, that's very kind of them, but those kind of initiatives are tricky.
Exactly. And, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about process for process's sake. I mean, of course, I don't want the Foreign Office to be a racist organisation.
Of course you don't.
Because I would lose out. I mean, but, hand on heart, in 11 years, I never experienced ever being held back because of the colour of my skin. So I don't know why the office needs to focus so obsessively on this stuff. And, again, the point I would make is there is a cost to this stuff. If senior management are spending a quarter or even half of their time, and I think often they are, on all of this non-essential stuff, it obviously leads to less time to be focusing on the really important things. And you just need to look at the current Foreign Office. We're woefully under-equipped when it comes to China, for example. We don't have enough people with China expertise. And rather than encouraging that, rather than encouraging people to be spending time really getting to grips with Mandarin or understanding Chinese military capabilities or Chinese AI, the senior management are encouraging people to go to unconscious bias training. And that's the argument. It's a distraction from what we should be focused on.
Yeah, spot on. Listen, Amir, it's lovely to speak with you. I wish you all the luck in the world with your new ventures, and it's great to have you on with us. Let's speak again. He is Amir Kotecha, former diplomat. He was head of the British consulate in Russia for a couple of years as well, an extensive, over a decade's worth of experience at the Foreign Office, and left because he felt it was just a little bit too wacky for him, what was going on there. And that experience at the beer, I've just remembered, by the way, when I was at the Finn, you would have loved this. I mean, imagine this to being the highlight of your career. There we are doing a breakfast show, and somebody came up with the idea that we need to do more outside broadcasts. Because when you're working in regional radio, and this is true, by the way, if you're using licence payers' money, it's not unreasonable to suggest that, if you can put a visual presence to it, then that's probably a good thing. Because obviously when you go out and do an OB, they bring all the signs out saying BBC and all that, and there's a big van parked outside with the name on it. So somebody came up with the tremendously exciting proposal of doing an OB on platform 4 of Tunbridge Station. So you can imagine I'm sitting there. I think it was 17.6% of me died in that one sentence, just hearing it. Tunbridge Station, platform 4. And there was some railway story about, that prompted this. And so as if that wasn't bad enough, on this particular day, we had a very senior manager who was sort of standing in, whose position was actually way above just holding editorial meetings. And he was sitting at the end of the table. And I thought, he's going to be my saviour at this. I've never met the guy before. He's going to be the man that's going to go, look, I know we're BBC local radio, but does anybody really want to hear a 3-hour show from platform 4 of Tunbridge? That's what I was expecting. And so this fella had suggested Tunbridge Station. We can do all the train stuff. We can get some local politicians on as well. That'd be good. And this fella at the end of the table is chewing his pen. I thought, this wise old owl is really going to step in here. And it got to him and he just went, yeah, high-vis jackets. And I thought, what? High-vis jackets? What about the high-vis? If you're doing an OB on a railway station, you're going to need high-vis jackets. You've got to be visible because there's like health and safety issues around standing on a platform, trains and stuff, other commuters. Mick, can you do the high-vis? Seriously? His editorial contribution to the already horrendous OB, Tunbridge Station, platform 4, was high-vis flipping jackets. And I tell you what, he thought he'd made the best point that had been made since Lord Reith started the BBC. That's the glow on his face. Yeah, high-vis. But that rather feeds into Amir's point about the priorities of it. Can we talk radio? We're radio. Let's make good radio, quality radio, fun radio, informative, debatable radio, radio that people talk about at the water cooler the next moment. And you want me arsing around on Tunbridge bloody Station in a high-vis jacket? We did the OB. I didn't wear the jacket, by the way. Somebody else did. I just kept thinking, please don't anyone get off one of these trains who knows me. It would have just been horrific. 0344 499 1000. Don't go away, Janet. We're going to be with you in just a second. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This in from Matthew in Cheltenham says, what an extraordinary bloke Amir is. A massive loss to the Foreign Office. He can have my back any day. Please get him back on soon. He was brilliant, wasn't he? And they would have probably thought, you know, how could this happen? How can a man like Amir leave the Foreign Office? You know, the other problem that happens in the civil service, and the BBC again, the examples I was giving, you've got a job for life, and you've got a job for life. You've got to more or less commit second-degree murder to lose the job. You've got a gold-plated pension, and that kind of lifer mentality. There's no, you haven't got to hit any targets. You haven't, you know, if you're not that good at your job, no one's going to fire you. When we used to have these breakfast show meetings that I was talking about, you know, nobody ever criticised the show. Nobody ever said, oh, that interview you did this morning, that was, you know, to be honest, mate, you could have done that a lot. But never did anyone ever say, you know, I think your timings were out, you know, you should have kept that interview with Farage going a bit longer, and the one you did with the Mayor of Dover wasn't long enough. You know, no one ever said that stuff. Everything was just kind of a very surface sort of congratulatory fest that went on for sometimes an hour, these meetings, every day. It was a waste of everybody's time. Let's just move. We're about to speak to Jana in Shropshire. Voice of Doom. Have we got a winner on the Voice of Doom? This is the voice that we played you 45 minutes ago.
There's hardly any experience.
So it's day 12. Can we finally put it to bed today? Some of the guesses: Peter Lilly, Claire Short, Tony Blair, Ian McMillan, William Hague, Ed Miliband, Nick Bowles, Sam Carling, Ben Habib, Gavin Barwell, Grant Shapps. They're all right. None of those are correct. We have not got a winner. It rolls over to Monday for day 13. Back to your calls. Jana in Shropshire, how are you doing?
Hello. I phoned last week, actually. I like talking to you.
Nice, thank you.
I'm so glad you didn't ask me about the Voice of Doom.
That's all right.
I want to talk to you about the lady who phoned about the Muslim prayers and
yes.
Explained to us very eloquently about Islam. I just wanted to explain. I'm a Jew, but I converted to Christianity quite a few years ago because I liked Jesus' teaching. And I thought, great, I'll start going to church. And oh my goodness, they're so woke. I started actually getting triggered by the wokeness.
Did you?
In these church. Yeah, I was getting like almost palpitations because
the vicar was giving you palpitations through their wokeness.
I get so triggered by well, I call it stupidity. You know, a lot of it is so stupid.
Exactly what it is, yeah.
And it's so like, oh, we're going to say this because it makes us look really nice. I'm like, no, you're not being nice. Yeah. So, I think, you know, the people who are coming here, they're not silly. You know, their whole point of what they need to do with the religion is get as many people to become Muslims as possible. And they need and I think it's even within their Bible, isn't it? The Quran.
Yeah.
They have to get people to become Muslims.
Is that?
To kill them.
But is that? Like, I mean, you've got like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and, you know, sort of Christian splinter groups. I know that's not the right way to describe it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Who also knock on doors to try and, either convert people or get people to come on board with their faith. Is that the duty of any religion?
Well,
to a
I
degree.
don't know if it's their duty, but they can choose to do that. Like, Jews actually don't want people to join them. They say, don't join our religion. It's not that good. You'll get into trouble a lot of the time. Being a Jew is not easy, but if you want to, you can, you know. I
always thought being a Jew was kind of like, you know, I've always been quite envious of the Jewish kind of, the cultural way of life that goes, so not exclusively, that kind of goes with Judaism a little bit.
Yeah,
sort
you're
of a
right.
family thing and extensions of, you know, there's one girl that I work with here who's Jewish, and she says we're in her neck of the woods, she can't move for bumping into somebody she knows. There's always a friend or a friend of an auntie, or, you know, she went to Wembley and bumped into someone who's wherever you go, you bump into somebody who knows somebody. You know, it's a non-stop thing.
It's it's wonderful. I've never been lucky enough to be a British Jew, because they do live in wonderful communities. Because I came from the Soviet Union, we were like Russian Jews, you know, that were different types of Jews in the sense that we never got into a Jewish community.
It's interesting.
We were always living in, you know, with people who are not Jewish.
Yeah.
So I became an English person, and Judaism for us was very, very cultural. So it was like the babushka, you know, the granny making you chicken soup. But we didn't have the religion. We had the whole culture. And even though my kids are in their 40s now and they were born in England, they still feel very Jewish because of the upbringing. Yeah.
Interesting. Listen, I hear what you're saying, and Jana, it's interesting, and thank you for your call. Lovely to speak. It's interesting what Jana was saying there about the woke nature of the church, and it seems to have, and I find that really bizarre, that of all places where you might think your escape from wokery was guaranteed, might well be in the church. You know, there is a seriousness to religion by definition, and you would hope that seriousness will be upheld at every respect. And of course, being a Christian, like, you know, I guess most faiths, you respect other people's faiths even if they're not the same as yours. But there's been a sense, and I think Jana there was articulating it, that Christianity, and we only talked about, was it yesterday, like, the Archbishop, who's, you know, they've been more focused on diversity and more focused in acknowledging alternative lifestyles or other forms of worship than they have about being Christian. And that's a bit weird, right? I mean, it's just, by any measure, it's a bit weird, it's a bit strange. 0344 499 1000. Dan says the blob, as in the civil service, has been feeding on wokery for the last 25 years, and now it's so fat it's become inactive and unable to function. Yeah, I think there's that. There is a sort of, it's not a workplace, it's a way of life in those heady positions in the civil service. It's a way of life, and people buy into that, and they are more obsessed with all manner of other initiatives and goings on than the actual job in hand. Thank you, Dan, for that. More from you on the way. Just gone 3:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 4. Kevin O'Sullivan, of course, here after the news at 4 o'clock. Now, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, set out 3 primary opportunities for UK economic growth, declaring the country will achieve the fastest AI adoption among the G7 nations. Are we ahead of the game? Let's speak with Anthony Walker, Deputy CEO at Tech UK. Good afternoon to you, Anthony. Nice to have you with us. Well, I'd like to think we're ahead of the game. What's the truth here?
In lots of respects, we are. We've got some of the world's best researchers. We've got some of the best universities. We lead in a lot of the kind of development of the technology. But where we kind of really need to make sure we keep pace is in the adoption of that technology. So that's the way in which companies really start to implement it and integrate it into their daily kind of workflows. And that's the bit where I think Rachel Reeves is right. The UK, can and should be a world-leading adopter, but we need to make sure that we've got the kind of the regulatory and the policy environment right in the UK to enable that to happen.
In terms of things like data centres, which of course are all intrinsic to this whole project, is that an example of how we're at the top of the pile on things like this? I don't know the specific figures. I'm sure you're more on top of this than me, but it does seem we're building quite a lot of these things. They're absolutely massive and clearly crucial, apparently, for the future.
Yeah, and actually the UK is a world leader in terms of its data centres, and it has been for a long time. And the good news is that we've got lots of companies who are saying that they want to invest in the UK and build that capacity here. One of the challenges that we do have is around access to energy and grid connections, and that's one of the things that's kind of slightly slowing things down. But there's also a worry amongst some of those kind of data center companies that they're a bit concerned about some of the rules around copyright in the UK could actually slow down the take-up of the compute in those data centers, because we've got a situation in the UK where the copyright environment in the UK makes it less favourable to do AI training here in the UK compared to our G7 competitors. So at the moment, most of those big, large language models are being trained in places like the US, where they've got a more enabling environment for copyright, which means that that's where some of the training's happening there. So we think this issue of copyright is one of the issues that we need to address when we're trying to create the environment that can keep the UK at the forefront.
Was this the area where the government dropped its preferred copyright plan? I think Elton John, Dua Lipa and others got involved in this. They were very unhappy. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So, and this is all about the fact that in other leading countries, they have either what's called a text and data mining exemption, or they have what are called fair use rules, which enable companies to access kind of data that's available on the internet and innovate with that data to create new things like AI. But the UK framework is much more restrictive, and that's the thing that we want to change. And the challenge is finding a route through that can work for both the technology innovators, but also works for creative industries and rights holders as well.
So was it, just to put that in sort of Janet and John type speak on this one, Anthony, was this a case really of the likes of Elton John saying, look, somebody should not be able to go onto Chat or Claude or Grok and simply say, right, write me a song that sounds very much like Elton John and probably penned alongside Bernie Taupin, that it would be almost indistinguishable from a genuine Elton John track? If you're Elton John, you might say, well, I don't want somebody to be able to do that. That's not okay. So what is the compromise on that specific point?
Actually, and on that point, that's called an output from an AI system, right? Where you're asking it to produce something, and if you're producing an output that exactly sort of mimics something like a song from a particular artist, well, you could claim that that's a copyright infringement, and I think you can do that under existing law. Where what we're talking about is the inputs into, so it's this issue of where large language models kind of take a lot of data that's across the internet and put it in and train their models on it. And what rights holders are saying is they want to get paid for data that goes as an input into the model.
So this would hoover up Elton John's back catalogue, everything Dua Lipa's ever done, and it would utilise that in some respects, and that's the point they were against.
Yeah, and so there's this question about kind of the inputs into models and the outputs of models, and actually we think they're two separate questions, whereas I think people like Elton John thinks it's one question, and that's where some of the disagreement is.
When it comes to the wider question on all of this, Anthony, about AI, because I read about it, use a little bit of AI, and a lot of the guys here in the office use it as well. mind-blowing stuff. You know, it's changed the face, you know, in the way that, you know, the internet changed things. I was thinking a little earlier when I was sourcing some stories, actually last night, and I thought, what the hell did I do without the internet, for goodness sake? Yeah. I can't really remember. It seems extraordinary that anything ever functioned without the internet, but of course it did. And now we have AI, and we'll be making similar proclamations about that. But in terms of its future and where it goes, I sort of ride between thinking this is incredible, what an amazing world we are in, and we're gifted to be around during this innovative time, and absolute abject terror, and like Stephen King level terror. Which one's the correct disposition?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think AI is going to be bigger than the internet in terms of the way it changes our lives. It changes the nature of jobs. It changes, you know, lots of things. And it's all about then, okay, so how do we make sure that we get the things that we want out of this technology, and that we mitigate against some of the kind of the risks that might come from the technology? I think I'm quite an optimist. I think if you think about things like jobs, sure, it's going to, you know, AI is going to massively change all of our jobs, just in the same way that the internet did. But I think it will also lead to the creation of lots of new jobs and lots of different jobs as well. And I know there's never been a time in history where technology hasn't come along that's you know meant there's net less jobs altogether. Yeah, you get some changes in the job market and so on, but overall we've always created more jobs for people, and I don't see there's any evidence to suggest that this is different this time.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, wearable technology as well, which kind of you know, how we interact as humans, that's all going to be kind of game changing. Research being, I know this does sound a bit tinfoil hat territory, but we know these research is big and quite advanced on things like chips that you know could be utilized at some point in a human context. What, I mean, are we? How far are we away from that kind of stuff, where, you know, we will be literally not chipped as in microchipped, but, you know, there'll be a device, if you want to clip it onto your ear, or a little pod in the back of your neck, you'll be able to, you know, go nuts and do it.
And look, there are definitely some innovations coming along that are going to have really transformational health benefits. You know, people with rare diseases and conditions where you know, there are going to be new types of remedy for those kind of conditions, and that's going to be great. I think we have to not, you know, we're still going to have choice as people here. You know, we'll be able to choose the you know, the way in which we want technology to kind of play a role. And that will be down to individual choices, but it's also about some of the choices that we make as a society as well, and getting the balance right. And I think, I mean, the companies that I work with are all really interested in that debate and want to be part of that debate. So we talk about it really being, you know, technology that works for people, not against them. And I think that's the way we all have to think about this.
Yeah, we had a conversation in the office before the show, and it's just a final, just a more light-hearted point, Anthony. The kind of conversation that will be better had over a couple of pints, frankly. I said to Finn, our producer, could you send me a link for a story we were looking at? And then I said, at some point, you won't have to send me the link. You'll just be able to think me the link, and I'll receive it, and I'll be able to get the link. He said, that's hundreds of years away. I said, I think it's closer than that. What do you say, Anthony?
Yeah, I don't think it's hundreds of years away. And it might be a lifetime away, it might be less, but I mean, I
don't know how it would work, by the way.
Yeah. And if I think, I mean, you know, most of the technology I've got around me right at this moment would have been science fiction when I was a kid.
Correct.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're going to see some amazing changes. And I think, and there's lots of potential to apply that change, you know, to really improve people's lives. And I think that's what we're really kind of focused on.
Indeed. Anthony, great to have you on, sir. Thank you for your time. We will speak again. Anthony Walker, Deputy CEO at Tech UK. Where is it all going? Where is the AI thing going? I mean, there is an enormous amount to be said on it. I think one of the things that feels a bit weird is, if you said to somebody who works very, very deeply in AI, if you said, this stuff seems to have come out of nowhere, they would go, mate, I've been working on this for 20 years. I'm sure there's truth in that, but the manifestation of it, and I'm talking about ChatGPT and, you know, Grok and all the others, these are just the basic web tools that punters can use. I mean, the stuff that goes on in terms of inventing and the like is in another league. That stuff did seem to just appear. 2 years ago, that wasn't there. When did ChatGPT pitch up, Finn? I mean, in everyday use? A year or so ago? 2 years ago max, I would say. Yeah, 2 years ago max. So before, and then they all appeared at the same time, which in a way that's not so strange that they would all come on board. But there is that sense, and if you look at what it can do, it's utterly game-changing. If you look at what it's going to do, it's utterly game-changing. But if you wanted evidence, look at the data centres. These things, I can't remember that big one they're building over here. Was it something like 17 Wembley stadiums big or something stupid like that? And you think, seriously? And that's just a big old storage warehouse, in layman's terms, housing a shed load of hard drives and fans and stuff that's churning away the information and the cogwheels of computerization moving in order to process and address a request. And they're huge. And you think, why don't we need all that lot? That's just one of them. There's dozens of these things around the country, probably hundreds of them in different shapes, forms and sizes. Now, here's a bit of breaking news. The Border Force chief in charge of tackling the small boats crisis has quit after failing to bring the numbers down. This is Martin Hewitt, the border security commander. He'll leave his role by the end of the month amid growing frustration at the continued surge in channel crossings. I don't know anything about Martin Hewitt, but I would imagine that stopping small boats, bringing down numbers, is not in the gift of a bloke that's appointed border security commander. I can't imagine he could physically do anything without fundamental and systemic change in government policy. Would that be fair? I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know whether he's a lefty, a righty, somewhere in the middle. As a civil servant, I'd imagine he was probably somewhere in the middle. They told him, like, here's your job, you've got to get the channel boat. One man can't do that. That's not even possible, is it? That's monumental government change. Change of rules and laws, nationally and internationally, that can stop that. Not a bloke called Martin, nice as I'm sure he is. That's the breaking news, that he's going by the end of the month, which is in about 10 days' time. So there you go. Right, before we crack on, more calls on the way. A final chance, and you've only got literally, about 12 minutes, is that right, Finn, to enter this? 13 minutes. I think it's 12 and a half to be completely accurate. The chance to win those 2 hospitality tickets to the British Grand Prix, Sunday the 5th of July. It's the full Racing Green trackside experience. It's the ultimate race day prize. You get the exclusive grandstand seats at the Loop and the Village Corners, plus inner track access to watch the drivers arriving in the paddock. There's hospitality, the shuttle bus, racing simulators, music between sessions, all-day street food. It's absolutely massive. This closes at 4 o'clock, so you've got about now 12 minutes to enter. And here is how you do it.
For your chance to win, text TALK to 83338. Text costs £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or call 0343 418 7260. Lines close 20th of March 2026 at 4 p.m. That's when you need to answer your phone if it rings. 18 plus UK residents only. This is a network promotion. Full T's and C's at talk.tv/win. So for your chance to win, text TALK to 83338 now.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Debbie says, how are we going to become the biggest AI nation with extortionate energy bills? It's a fair point as well. And Matthew in Cheltenham. Oh, no, I did read Matthew's talking about Amir, our guest, who we had on earlier. Tony in Suffolk, wouldn't it be great if there was such a thing as a religion? Wasn't such a thing as religion. What a much peaceful and happy place this would be. Yeah, you might be right. And there's a song about that, isn't there? Grace is down in London, who would not want to see the eradication of religion, I would imagine. Grace, good afternoon to you.
Hi. Well, it might depend on how you define it, I suppose.
Yeah.
And there was a spoken word, that's kind of like a modern form of poetry performance a number of years ago called Why I Hate Religion But Love Jesus. And I recommend people look it up. Okay. And it's kind of making the point that whereas in most religion, you have to kind of earn your way to heaven somehow, contrastingly, Jesus says, no, actually, the only way is through what I do on the cross, what he's done for us. So it's a bit of a different idea. We don't kind of earn our way there.
Yeah.
But if we're following him, we will actually want to do good things and be peaceful. And a lot of people have done great things because they've been trying to follow his teachings. And so to imagine that the world would be more peaceful if there were no people trying to follow him, as the last comment suggested, I think is mistaken. And I think that quite a lot of people who are already egotistical or territorial have throughout history said, well, I am fighting because I'm noble and righteous and God is on my side. So they've used religion as a kind of excuse. And Jesus got blooming angry with those people. I don't think it's belief in God itself that causes people to fight. I think people will fight one way or another.
No, I hear that, but Grace, is religion mostly just a massive insurance policy?
Not really, no, because you have to ultimately, at the end of the day, work out what you consider to be true. And I kind of grew up going to church and finding it very nice, but thinking increasingly I don't really believe in any of this. And then I looked further and found there was actually rational reasoning to conclude that it's true. And you could decide to just try to believe because you hope that it will get you into heaven, but actually you've got to look for yourself and decide what you think is the truth. And it's also not just about heaven or the life beyond this one. It gives people a sense, including myself, joy and meaning in this lifetime. And are you familiar with Pascal's wager at all?
I was literally about, which is what I said about the insurance policy thing. That is Pascal's wager, right?
To some extent it is, but at the same time, you can't necessarily just kind of force yourself to believe something. As I was just saying, you have to work out for yourself what you consider to be true. And Jesus is saying, you can choose to turn to him or not, and it's each person's personal decision. Can I say quickly on the subject of Easter eggs? I was just looking up old Easter egg boxes since your prior caller was saying that you can't put the word Easter on an egg box anymore. And I've been looking at pictures of eggs from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and hardly any of them have the word Easter on them.
Yes, apparently somebody contacted us and said there was quite a lot in the 60s, and then they seemed to disappear from the 60s.
That's interesting. But, I mean, I'm kind of thinking, actually, what really matters is what Jesus did at that time of year, and what it says on the packaging in a supermarket in itself is not of particular...
I would imagine that it was a business decision, not a sensitivity decision, where, all those egg companies probably have several millions of pounds worth of eggs left after Easter. And there'll be some people who don't buy into Easter, so they probably thought, well, just call it a chocolate egg. Then we've covered a few bases. More chance of selling it after Easter, even though it's the same thing. Something on that lines, I guess. But the message of Easter, I think most people wouldn't really know about, would they?
Well, that's a good question, actually. I don't know how widespread the knowledge is.
I mean, I've read bits of the Bible. I can't find the Easter bunny anywhere.
No,
it's got to be in there somewhere.
I don't think there are any rabbits at all in the whole Bible.
No, there's some camels, but...
there are camels, yes.
Goats.
But yeah, the thing that we remember is that Jesus took the punishment that is kind of warranted by the things that we do wrong, and then rose. And I know that sounds completely nuts, but I came to conclude that it actually happened when I read quite a bit about it.
No, that's fine. Listen, Grace, I've got to run because we need to get another caller on before. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'd imagine Noah's Ark had some rabbits. I mean, I'm going for maybe 2. This is Craig in Leeds. What do you think, Craig? Good afternoon to you.
I think she was a very good caller, by the way.
She was
and
great.
Definitely 2 rabbits.
Yeah, they're definitely 2.
On the ark.
Yeah.
I think the fundamental problem that everybody misses is the actual quality of the candidates. When you look at the universities and you look at people growing up and at their education, the actual quality of candidates don't go into politics.
Yeah.
They go into private companies. I know people that are in their 2nd and 3rd year that are earning more money than politicians are in London.
Yeah.
If you look at the front bench of the Labour candidates, who would hire any of them? I'm not being funny.
That's a very good point. Nobody would.
You've got Rachel Reeves, who would not get a CFO job in a private company, in a private 250 company, yet she can be the CFO of the UK.
Yeah.
To me, that is absolutely balmy.
But she will get, when she finishes being Chancellor, I bet she gets offered jobs as a consultant around the table in some of these companies.
I'll be very surprised, actually, if she does.
Well, on the basis that she knows that, she knows the journey to get what you want, I guess. I don't know.
I just don't think that the hiring policy of some of these people would make it in a private company. If you had people coming more from a business background, I think the actual quality of how people run businesses, understand taxes, understand P&Ls and strategy, I think that the country would look a hell of a lot different.
I think you're right. Listen, Craig, I've got to run because we've hit the end of the show. Do call again. I know you're a new caller, and thank you for that. Really appreciated. And have a lovely weekend. That's Craig down in Leeds. Thank you to him. And Peter in Northamptonshire. Christian churches have had a lot of bad press over decades due to various serious allegations. The leaders of the church have failed to reconstruct why Christianity should be practiced. Cracking point from Peter. Thank you for that. Always a cracking point from Kevin O'Sullivan, who's next.
How you doing? Right, a couple of things about this Islam issue. OK, we're talking about Trafalgar Square. As we speak, 30,000 Muslims are having a prayer session in a park in Birmingham. 30,000.
Wow.
Also, why are so many British